Looking ahead to the State of the Nation address by the President, we've had a tragic start to the year, of course, the Parliament fire, among other issues.
The Cape Town City Hall is well known for being the first place Nelson Mandela addressed South Africans after being released from prison in 1990. And now it'll play host once again, this time for the opening of Parliament, after a devastating blaze gutted the National Assembly earlier this month.
A lot of people looking ahead to what could be said and what should be said by President Cyril Ramaphosa.
South Africans are still grappling with a deteriorated economy exacerbated by the ongoing coronavirus pandemic.
Things have gone worse. There are fires within his party, literal fires outside, and he needs to project something beyond the droning, mindless speeches that we've been accustomed to and which put us to sleep.
Many have labeled this the toughest SONA address to date. President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa has a mountain to climb.
If he does not acknowledge the depth of our crisis, South Africans will not believe him.
Promises are often made, but are they actually kept? And what should the president focus on this year?
There's still so much that you promised before, could not fulfill. Why should we trust anything new that you would introduce in the SONA?
He has to answer for that. I don't think he will. I think there'll be excuses made. He needs to be able to show that he's got a government that he leads, not that he seems to be led by.
He should focus more on really giving us a practical plans of what is going to be done.
Good evening, goeienaand, sawubona. Welcome to our special broadcast of SONA 2022, coming to you live, unpacked, uncensored. This year's State of the Nation address is unique, as the President will be delivering his speech from the Cape Town City Hall. We'll bring you all the inside scoops, interviewing special guests, DA Leader John Steenhuisen, and a host of DA MPs, giving insight on critical issues, including state capture, education, energy, and of course, jobs. We'll be answering your questions throughout the evening, so post them in our YouTube and Facebook comment section. You can also join the conversation by using the hashtag SONA2022. We look forward to hearing from you. To unpack SONA 2022, I'm joined in studio by Tammy Jackson, Zakile Mbele, Ashor Sarupan, and Emma Powell. Welcome everyone, and good evening.
Good evening, Richard. Thanks very much.
I'm looking forward to hearing from what the team are calling the SONA squad here tonight. But we have already got a lot of questions in and comments from the viewers. Now, I'd like to take this first one because we saw this in our intro. And Natasha Prinsloo says, happy to see SONA going ahead. Very sad, Parliament burnt down. Ashor, it was absolutely sad.
It was a terrible start to the year to see my workplace going up in flames, but it's indicative of the state of the country and the real state of the nation. And many small towns and small and secondary cities across the country in a state of decay, and lack of maintenance has really hurt a lot of people's businesses, their livelihoods in these places, and Parliament suffered from that exact problem. Sprinklers didn't work, and the lack of maintenance that people experienced in their small towns came to Parliament and became a toxic mix that burnt it down. And here we are.
And if we look at Parliament, the building is a symbol, but there's also, Parliament has to go on. We can't say the building's burnt down, so we'll pick this up again next year.
No, absolutely. And Richard, it comes at a time that this nation can least afford it. We need, after 2 years of COVID, we need our leadership back in Parliament, passing the right laws, developing innovative policies that will get our nation out of this quagmire that we find ourselves in. And what was so devastating for me especially was to read that despite the millions of rands that the Secretariat of Parliament had spent on making copies of Hansards and protecting timeless records, that work in fact had not been done. And so Parliament itself has lost a lot of the history that has been preserved. And it's, again, as Ashel said, just an indictment of the state of this nation.
Yeah. And Rodney Tito, his question is, why is the State of the Nation address so important? I mean, why should people care about it? And it is critical, Zach.
It absolutely is, and it should be held with much higher prestige in terms of what we hear from the president. So it's meant to be an annual review and a looking back of the previous year of government, what progress has been made with performance and the promises made, and then looking forward to project how we can build on that progress, as well as to own up to shortcomings and where things were deficient, but then also to talk about how those will be corrected in order to overall move momentum forward. Cyril, unfortunately, has not been one for fulfilling his promises and for seemingly giving empty promises, but we must still observe it for what it ideally should be.
Yeah, I think you say promises. We've had so many promises, haven't we? I mean, we've year after year after year, the promises just never get heard. And Tammy, I'm just someone, Zakile Mgandi says, what about the youth? We're always ignored. I mean, are the youth ever taken into consideration during SONA speeches, or are they, like in the employment sector, just left out of everything?
Look, Richard, I will be the first person here today to admit that I'm not particularly the most enthusiastic person when it comes to SONA, quite frankly. And that is because every single year, Cyril makes all these grand speeches and announcements, but nothing really comes to fruition as the year progresses. And so in as much as I do believe that SONA is good for our democracy, it's rather unfortunate that, as a young person, I feel this way because youth unemployment is at an all-time high as we speak, and there's many people, young people who still struggle to find employment, skills, and opportunities. So I'm sorry to sound cynical, but I think that there's been a pattern of just empty promises year after year after year.
And the youth have lost interest. They're not interested.
Absolutely.
They have been left out of the equation. We've got a 66% youth unemployment rate, and the youth don't have time to be sitting and listening to lists of broken promises year in and year out. They are checked out and they are disillusioned with the political elite.
And that brings me to Rick van Hastien's question. And here I'm not the expert, and I'm asking my colleagues who have been in the House. Rick, he says, past SONAs have been characterized by violent disruptions, mainly by the EFF, cell phone jams, signals that have been jammed, and general chaos. And that isn't what Parliament is meant to be. People shouldn't tune in to watch people being thrown out.
No, I mean, look, Richard, I just want to say we need to be honest. Disruption is the EFF's grand strategy when it comes to gaining political capital and clout. And I should actually just change it, not even grand strategy anymore. I should take the word grand out because of how predictable they've become. It's just a general strategy that they use year after year, and they get it right because no one really holds them accountable for their anti-democratic behavior. And so if it does happen this year, I wouldn't be surprised one bit. But I hope that the Speaker made some provision for some extra security so that they can gently just...
Now, SONA has become the showcase platform for the EFF to implement their playbook, as Tammy says. It is about disruption. It's about making a spectacle and grabbing the spotlights, but not contributing to and not strengthening what is meant to be the people's business being done in the People's Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure sitting there while this is happening, I mean, on TV, I don't think we get to hear half of what happens, but the intense vitriol that comes out sometimes from people screaming at each other across the aisle. Sure, that's certainly also probably got to dampen a person's enthusiasm.
Well, I think it sort of degrades the entire decorum of the House and makes people take the entire event less seriously, and that is a problem. But at its core, it speaks to the fact that the EFF actually don't fundamentally agree with the entire constitutional framework that we have. And so they disrespect it not only because they want to grab newspaper headlines and get all the media attention and because it's part of their political predictable strategy, but because it's their way of saying all of the institutions of democracy, all of the institutions that support democracy and so on are things we do not care about. And so there will be not just flippant, there will be the screaming, there will be swearing, there will be racially charged remarks at members of the House. Violence, and they will not stop until they tear down the entire constitutional architecture of the country. And that's why they do this year after year after year. It's a repetitive signal for them saying, we will not stop. And the fact that when Parliament burnt, they went onto Twitter, a whole lot of EFF MPs, and celebrated it. I mean, nobody celebrated the burning of the Reichstag in Germany in 1939, and we know those who did celebrate what they got up to. But the intent of the EFF is very much to tear it all down.
Yeah.
And it fed into one of their long-standing agendas, which has been their push to move Parliament to Johannesburg or to Pretoria, which obviously we know in the Constitution, Parliament is in Cape Town, and it would take a constitutional amendment essentially to change that. But it allowed them to drive that agenda. And again, the EFF's agenda is a self-serving agenda. It's easier for their MPs not to have to travel to Cape Town every week to do business. It's all about their inward, glaring. And actually not outward looking to serve the interests of the people of this country.
Well, let's hope that tonight we're not going to see any of these disruptions, because this is a critical part of the work that is done in this country. Remember to like and share this broadcast with your friends. Remember to use our YouTube and Facebook comment section. And we're now going to cross over to the Cape Town City Hall, where my colleague Karabo Gauchau will be speaking to the DA Parliamentary Chief Whip, Natasha Mazzoni. Over to the Cape Town City Hall.
Behind me is the beautiful City Hall where Nelson Mandela delivered his first ever speech as a free man almost 32 years ago, almost to the date. Indeed, it's a significant moment for South Africa, but the mood is different. It's somber, it's not the same. But joining me here in conversation is the Chief Whip of the official opposition in the National Assembly, Natasha Mazzoni. Natasha, people are wondering, what is the difference between having a SONA here or in Parliament? Take us through the proceedings.
So, Karabo, one of the things is we have to get screened, and no cars were allowed anywhere here. Members were searched, taken by shuttle and brought down to the area. Obviously, the police doing a great job. We can see them tonight out in full force, and they are making sure that no one is armed, that people are going to be kept safe here tonight. So it's a different atmosphere in that we've never had this level of security, and we've never had sort of this feeling that we've got, about just the fact that Parliament has burnt down. I mean, it's hard to comprehend that the Houses of Parliament where we work and where we operate from have caused do not exist anymore. But you hit the nail on the head. Nelson Mandela gave his first speech as a free man, and that means whatever happens, democracy must always triumph.
Okay, can we expect any disruptions?
I'm sure we can. I think our friends in red, it's the only game they know. It's the only game they have for us is a disruption of Parliament. They have nothing else to offer our country. So a fascist revolutionary will be a fascist revolutionary. So, but we're not here for them. We're here for South Africans. We're here to hold the government to account, and we want to hear what the President has to say.
Okay, speaking of accountable, we want to get Parliament working. What is the DA's plan? Closing shots.
Well, we want the economy to open up fully. We want Parliament to open up fully. We want to see incentives for young people to get work done, and we want to see this break that's happened in our security services, the wedge that's been driven. We want to see that gone, and we want to see the security services working as one to keep our country safe. And let's see if the President has the guts to hold his ministers to account. And wouldn't it be great tonight if he announced a few ministers that he's chucking out?
That would be excellent. Thank you, Natasha. Coming to you, crossing over to you, Richard.
With almost half the South African population unemployed, spiralling debt levels and rising costs of living, urgent government intervention is needed. But instead, billions of rands are stolen by corrupt ANC fat cats. Basic services are falling apart, and hope for a better future is rapidly dwindling. The DA has a plan to turn the economy around, and the DA has a track record of creating meaningful and sustainable job opportunities. But will President Ramaphosa listen and announce some of these steps tonight?
The unemployment crisis has left many South Africans struggling to put food on the table. More than 7 million people are currently jobless. The crisis is worsened by the pandemic, and young people in particular can't find work.
Currently, over 7.8 million South Africans are unemployed, making South Africa one of the leading countries with a high unemployment rate.
Many people have lost their jobs and have had to reduce incomes due to COVID-19. However, the increasing cost of living continues unabated.
There seems to be no end to rising food costs in the country.
It now costs more than ever to survive. That's a simple fact.
South Africa has had an unemployment problem for the past 25 years. We don't have an economy that's growing fast enough on one hand, but on the other hand, we don't have the skills as well.
3.3 million of them are not in employment, not in education or training. That needs some serious fixing, doesn't it?
We want to contribute to the economy of this country.
Everything flows once you start to create jobs. If you're worried about inequality, if you're worried about healthcare, if you're worried about tax collection, all of that requires employment in order to improve that.
Welcome back. Yes, jobs and the economy certainly something that impacts every household in South Africa. Luke Albert from Johannesburg says that Ramaphosa has promised to curb unemployment and create millions of jobs. Why does this never materialize? Zach?
Well, the very simple reason, Richard, why unemployment has been this immovable challenge is because President Ramaphosa and his government, his administration, has been unable and unwilling to make the bold and radical reforms that are needed in order to stimulate employment, catalyze growth, and have us see those unemployment figures go down. Because unfortunately, many of the reforms that are needed are going to act against the interests of many of his alliance partners in the ANC. We need a flexible labor regime, for example, in order to incentivize employers especially small business, taking on inexperienced and young workers. But that goes against the labor union agenda. So the president has to make a choice between the country, the youth, the economy, and employment, or his political allies and his own interests within the ANC. And he said that he put the ANC first. So that, quite frankly, is the answer.
Yeah, I think we've seen where his choice has gone. Tell me, the youth unemployment figure in this country is insane. Is this one of the reasons why the youth just don't seem to care about politics anymore, because they just don't see anyone actually getting out there to help them?
I do think that there's a very large degree of political apathy in our country, particularly around young people. However, I would say that the reason why young people don't really want to go out to the polls or get involved in civil society is really because, they haven't been given the opportunity to reach or discover their potential and self-actualize, because they are disproportionately affected by issues like youth unemployment, as mentioned, lack of opportunities, there's no jobs out there, many of them haven't acquired the necessary skills. And I think that if President Cyril Ramaphosa and his government wanted to do something about the youth unemployment crisis in the country tomorrow, they could, if they wanted to, quite frankly. Because the ideas are there, it's on the table, but the issue is that there's simply not enough political will.
Yeah. And those issues aren't smart cities and bullet trains.
No,
there has to be something else. Yeah.
They're simple.
And in fact, just to add on to Tammy's point, there really is so much hunger out there among young people for opportunities for them to apply themselves, for them to develop their skills and to build their own livelihood. I mean, we always say that a job is the first step towards self-dignity and self-reliance, because then you aren't reliant on grants, you aren't reliant on public goodies being handed out, like the relief grants, for example. You want to make your own money, make your own choices, and be a self-empowered young person. And for those opportunities to happen, we've got to change 180 degrees from where the policy thrust is right now.
And we see from questions from the public as well, they look at money being spent on extravagant projects that never happen, and extravagant parties and things like that. I mean, 50 million just going to Cuba, and we don't know why. People look and say that money should be spent here.
Yeah, quite frankly, there's a lot of money in the system that is not spent efficiently and not spent on the right priorities. And priorities tell you everything what a government believes in. So when it comes to jobs, the president comes to office in 2018. In 2019, he gets his first mandate. And then the first thing they pursue is trying to get expropriation without compensation through Parliament. That tells you that his priority was not, let's get the economy moving. It was instead to placate the radicals in his party, that he would then try to push through something that fundamentally at its core deters investment and scares away job creation. So there's that. Then you see the way they choose their spending priorities. And they spend more on VIP protection than land reform, to pivot back to the land issue. And so when you see this in the budget, that they would rather pay more for their own bodyguards than to have any land reform programs in this country that are market-based. Now, of course, they're not going to meet their land reform targets, and then the useful scapegoat are things like expropriation. But the consequence of these bad spending priorities is increased unemployment and increased poverty, and they've created a vicious cycle. It doesn't have to be a vicious cycle. It's a consequence of bad policy and bad spending priorities.
Yeah.
Definitely. And Emma, if I can come back to you, Emil has sent us a question, Emil Langenhoven, who says, the DA has opposed race-based job-killing policies, and you were talking about this earlier. Why is the ANC so dead set on policies like BEE when it's clearly failed?
Well, Ashall's just highlighted because they're interested in achieving their own ends and their own outcomes. And scrapping BEE, when there is evidence, 26 years worth of evidence that it has failed this nation, it would cut off the tenderpreneurship and the patronage network of the ANC money delete. And just to come back to what Ashall was saying in terms of priorities, more money on VIP security than on land reform. In Ramaphosa's budget speech last year, he had promised the nation that they would be, well, that his government would be establishing an agrarian land reform agency. Has that promise been kept? No, that promise has been broken. And in order to change things, Richard, there are such simple policy changes that can be made. Things like cutting red tape and bureaucracy and making it easier for small businesses to do business. Loosening the noose that the trade unions have around government's neck so that they are able to make more sort of capitalist and laissez-faire economic decisions that benefit ordinary business men and women. And then lastly, just to essentially reform our labour laws.
And I think we'll touch on this perhaps a little bit later when we talk about crime and safety. But how do you encourage people to go into job-creating businesses when they're unsure of whether they'll be safe, whether they'll be protected if there's any type of unrest? Yeah. And I mean, we saw this in July last year.
That's actually such a key point that really gets touched on, Richard, is that crime, apart from how it makes families and communities feel unsafe, it is actually a deterrent and a retardant on the economy and on job creation, because it does at least two things. One is that it adds to the cost of business, because now you must spend money on security systems, hiring security guards, infrastructure, sensors, etc., which could be going towards investing to expand the business and therefore hire more people. But secondly, it then becomes, as you said, a deterrent or a dampener on investment, because why take the chance of investing in a business if it's going to be burned down in a riot, or you're going to have your stock looted and plundered. So it just acts on so many fronts to also add to that killing and the strangling of the economy.
Yeah. And there's a message that's come in from Mzoli Kaba, and it's actually quite sad because I think this is a case study for so many South Africans. And Mzoli says, I was forced to close down my fast food spaza shop during level 5 lockdown, and I've been unable to get back and make a living since then. And I think there's so many South Africans who want to work, who are trying to work, who are prepared to do whatever it takes, but the circumstances in South Africa at the moment, they just don't allow it.
No, it's a completely business and employment unfriendly environment, especially for small and micro enterprises, who we should be enabling and encouraging to ply their trade, to hire people so we can address unemployment. I always like to point to the example of a business in Khayelitsha that arose out of the need to deliver chronic medicines to the infirm and to the elderly, and they did so through bicycle delivery. And that small business eventually grew to employ more young people. So it was both meeting a need in the community, creating employment, and just creating value in that community. So that's what we need to see more of, and not shops being closed, but shops being opened and multiplied and expanded.
Yeah, assistance for the people, basically, because they're saying we're trying our best, the government should be helping us, and they're really not. I'm hearing that potentially we are going back to the city of Cape Town. I'd just like to remind everyone to give us your inputs. We really appreciate the ones that are coming through. To our viewers, remember to like and share this broadcast with your friends, and post your comments and questions in our YouTube and Facebook comment section. You can also join the conversation by using the hashtag SONA2022. Let's go back down to the Cape Town City Hall, where Karabu is joined by the DA Shadow Minister for Employment and Labour, Dr. Michael Cadre.
Thank you, Richard. Michael, it is becoming more expensive each and every day to live in South Africa. Yet the ANC is set on increasing the prices of fuel, electricity and food. What is the DA doing to fight this?
Karabu, you're absolutely right. The cost of living is becoming more expensive for everyone. But what always happens in these instances is that it's the poor that are hardest hit. That's because they spend a disproportionate amount of the little that they have on food, fuel and electricity. Now, we've seen that the price of petrol, diesel and paraffin has gone up very recently. Eskom has also proposed a 20.5% increase in the electricity tariff. What is the DA doing? We've called on the Minister to completely revise, revisit and review the fuel pricing model. As far as Eskom is concerned, we want to become less reliant on Eskom with alternative sources of energy, but we've also launched a massive petition which has garnered tens of thousands of signatures objecting to this 20.5% increase, and it's DA mayors in municipalities across the country that we govern that are really driving this particularly hard.
There is obviously a conversation around jobs. Each and every year we hear how millions of jobs are going to be created. But why are none of these promises materializing?
Well, it's very hard to create jobs when you don't have the big picture right. And unfortunately, the ANC adopts policies which have the effect of strangling growth, killing jobs and deterring investment. Without economic growth and without investment, you are not going to get job creation. So we need to take things off the table like expropriation without compensation, which frightens investors. They become very risk averse. And we also need to look at other policies which deter investors. Where the DA governs, we make sure that we focus on getting the basics right, that we deliver services and that we create the environment which is conducive to investment, growth and therefore job creation.
Yeah, and this is why the DA governments have the lowest unemployment rate across the
Precisely.
country.
If you look at the towns that the DA governs, inevitably they have much lower unemployment rates than where the ANC governs.
Yeah. Parting shots, what is your mandate to the President?
Three things that I would call on the President to focus on. Firstly, he needs to take expropriation without compensation in any guise off the table completely. It's a non-starter. Secondly, in order to create jobs in South Africa, we really need to relook at our labour market. It's very rigid. We've got labour laws and labour regulations which really stifle employment creation. For example, collective bargaining agreements are automatically extended to small firms and to new firms. We need to take that off the table too and exempt small and new firms from those collective bargaining agreements. And thirdly, we need to cut red tape. We need to free up small businesses to employ as many people as they can and to incentivize them to do so.
Thank you, Michael. We hope the President hears this and he'll finally show leadership. Thank you. Back to you in studio.
In South Africa, 56 people are murdered every day and 105 people are raped. In the previous quarter, murder increased by 20% and child murders increased by almost 32%. South Africans from all walks of life are traumatized by the effects of crime. They feel unsafe in their own homes, on their own farms, and in their own communities. It's clear that the SAPS and Police Minister Cadre are losing the fight against crime. President Ramaphosa, we need bold and decisive action. Genoeg is genoeg. While you and your cabinet are protected by VIP blue light brigades, everyone else lives in fear of being attacked, raped, and even murdered.
As law and order collapsed in parts of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, some citizens took it upon themselves to defend their communities and businesses from looters.
It's very clear that the SAPS is completely overstretched.
Government knew that this was going to happen. And if they didn't know it was going to happen, they should be fired.
The country's been let down very, very badly by our police minister and by the state security agency.
That is a public emergency that nobody in authority in this country has taken responsibility for.
Shrinking budgets due to economic stagnation and national debt is resulting in fewer police on our streets.
The police ministry has denied it is prioritizing the safety of politicians over that of the general public. But a closer look at the numbers paints a rather different picture.
There's still no clear answers as to how Parliament's security was breached on the 2nd of January.
It is a national key point. It needs to be protected.
What does this mean for the stability of our country?
How do we move forward from this to prevent exactly that happening again?
We need to fix this and fix it properly. But unless our leadership deal with the real underlying issues, we will sit here forever and a day not unlocking the potential that this country has.
All we want from the top is ethical leadership and good governance.
Welcome back. Yes, we were talking amongst ourselves in the SONA squad about how it would be wonderful if the amount of policemen around the City Hall today could be deployed equally on other days to areas where the crime is out of control and visible policing is necessary. And that brings me to Sarah Miller's question. Well, not a question. She says, SAPS is useless. Always late if they come at all. And I suppose we can't say every single policeman is bad, but the resources and the deployment and the management of the police force just seems to be awful, Ashon.
Yeah, so we've got a very low police to citizen ratio in this country. And that's just the crux of we don't have enough police officers for the number of people that we have. And of course, that's inefficiently deployed. In South Africa, local government and provincial government don't control SAPS. There's a central police ministry and there's a central police commissioner. They appoint the provincial commissioners, who appoint station commanders. They all control it from a central point. And those decisions are made there. So your local administrations who know where the hotspots are, who would be able to manage these things more effectively, cannot. And so it feels like SAPS takes forever. It's because the entire management structure is not lending itself to localized systems. It's rather command and control from a central national government. And it does not work. It does not work for the citizens. The DA has called for years and years and years for decentralization of police. In the Western Cape, of course, we have introduced LEAP officers and all sorts of other programs, money that actually we don't get funding for from national government, but we have to augment this function. But at the end of the day, it does mean that we don't get the service we need and that crime is not contained. And it affects business. Thereafter, it affects the ability for people to live lives that they value. So it's a fundamental problem.
People's confidence is very, very low in the ability for the police to protect them. I mean, it's...
But it's precisely because of DA-run local governments like the City of Cape Town's investment into metropolitan police services that the City of Cape Town, for example, has been able to triple the arrest rate in Cape Town in the past 3 years. They've also managed to capacitate, I think it's about 197 new neighborhood watches, make sure that they've got the right equipment. And I just want to tell you a quick anecdotal story. I was in Gauteng last week on an oversight visit that had been arranged for the members of the Human Settlements Committee. And we had to go to various human settlement development sites. And when we got into our taxi to take us there, we were accompanied by 12 provincial police officers on BMW motorbikes. We had 2 blue light brigades who were cutting off the traffic and rushing through. And on the way back from Johannesburg, my cell phone was stolen on the plane. And I went to the local police station and I needed a pen to fill out my affidavit. And the police officer asked his colleague, "Do you have a pen?" And he pulled one out of his pocket and it was completely broken. And he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, this is the only pen that we have." So you've got politicians being escorted by blue light brigades and BMWs, and you've got men and women who are police officers trying to serve their communities who don't even have pens for people to write affidavits.
And that is the true picture of ineffective and dysfunctional policing. And I always say the blame does not fall on the operational officers on the ground. If anything, they are being hard done by mismanagements at the top brass level. I think at one point a couple of years ago, there was a budget analysis done which showed that only 35% of the SAPS budget resources actually land up at police station level, which is where the rapid response and the deployments for patrolling and investigations actually happens. The bulk of it, 65%, is sitting at provincial and national officers who are merely doing paper pushing and admin. It should be the reverse. The bulk of the resources should be on the ground, operational, investigation, patrolling, security presence, and you should have a slimmed down administration capacity at provincial and national level to then oversee and coordinate that. And it links to cadre deployment, because the easy, cushy jobs to give to cadres are in air-conditioned offices in order to then pay them fat salaries for doing nothing.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to add to Zach's point about cadre deployment. Richard, I think it's incredibly difficult for anyone to speak about the South African Police Service without really referring to it as some substructure of the ANC, because that's really what it is. If
Massive
we're going
employment
to be honest.
agency.
Exactly. And I mean, there's been countless books and articles and reports and exposés about the fact that cadre deployment and ANC internal politics play a huge role in how the SAPS function in the country, and is really at the crux of why our policing is failing. And so I think that the July unrest is a typical example of exactly that, because it exposed the weaknesses within SAPS as an institution.
I think if you look at the police service, it's become like so many other government positions and departments that they're all still there, but their actual task has been outsourced, because now everyone just goes to private security. I mean, even some of our police stations are guarded by private security. And throughout government, they're still employing people who are not doing a job because it's been outsourced to somebody else. So it's that type of easy, I consider my office, because we actually have outsourced the job to somebody else. And I mean, I think that's what many citizens out there realize, they don't feel safe in their homes.
They don't, but also because SAPS, they really do value political loyalty over competence. And so a lot of the critical posts within the South African Police Service, it's not really filled with people who, have the experience, the expertise in a particular sector. And I think that's also a huge problem, because quite frankly, it's the reason why the SAPS are not able to be as efficient as what it should be.
And training. I have a story, Emma, as well. I was walking down to the Marx building. I was in a coffee shop and I looked out the window, and there was an elderly gentleman who had been assaulted by a younger guy who had taken his parcel off him. And the older guy was holding on to him, trying to keep his parcel, and the younger man was punching him. And I was standing next to a police sergeant in a coffee shop, and I said, "Sergeant, please, this guy's beating this guy, can you help him?" And the police sergeant went outside, and I grabbed my coffee, and when I went outside, the police sergeant had just got a better viewing point and was standing watching these two fight. And 2 parking assistants ran up, separated them, gave the old man his packet back, and said to this guy, "Go on, off you go, and the sergeant just stood there, and I thought to myself, that's probably a lack of training, that they don't know how to intervene in something like that.
Mismanagement as well, when you have operated, and it's absolutely no excuse, but when you have operated in an environment where your requests and your basic needs are constantly ignored, day in and day out, and nothing around you works, it disincentivizes you. I mean, one of the classic tales of late was during the riots in KZN in July, that it was private citizens who were supplying the police services with
fuel,
ammunition.
Yeah, fuel, ammunition.
And fuel, because they were sitting at less than 50% of what their required stock was. Same with the army. It was the farmers in rural KZN who were supplying the army with diesel in many instances. And it's when you work in those conditions, it becomes a culture. And that's why where we govern, we promote a culture of excellence, not a culture of mediocrity.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've seen another stone that gets thrown at the police a lot is that of bribery. That you're not going to get arrested because as long as you have some lunch money in your driver's license that you give to them or something. I mean, that's horrific to think that this is what we do. Okay, that's very, very serious topic. Many people feel that this is one issue that needs to get addressed. They want to feel safe on the streets, they want to feel safe at home, and they want to feel safe at work. Okay, I think to our viewers out there, thank you very much for your comments so far. They keep coming in. We won't get to all of your questions, but we certainly will try. Keep posting them on YouTube and Facebook comment section. You can join the conversation using the hashtag SONA 2022, and we certainly look forward to getting in more questions. Next, we're heading back to City Hall again, where Karabu has with her the DA Shadow Minister of Police, Andrew Whitfield.
Andrew, the reason we're standing here today instead of at Parliament is because SAPS has failed in its duty to protect Parliament. What does this say about the state of our state security?
Well, I think the burling down of Parliament is the biggest symbol of SAPS sleeping on duty. We see SAPS sleeping in police stations, and now we've seen them sleeping on the job while Parliament burns, and we're standing outside Cape Town City Hall, which is probably the biggest symbol of a capable state against a failing state just down the road. We have a Western Cape government and a City of Cape Town pushing for the decentralisation of policing, which is something we're championing in Parliament and is something the President needs to take note of. Where we are able to get things done, we need to replicate that across the country. And there's clearly a model in this province that works in order to get things done. So I think the state of policing leaves much to be desired. The state of the presidency in respect of policing leaves much to be desired. And we've seen an increase in farm attacks, increases in violent crime across the country when the President promised to halve violent crime in his first term of office. Well, he's halfway through, and today's a big moment for the issue of safety in South Africa. And let's see if the President has anything for us in his speech.
Speaking of the contrast of competence governance, we've, as the DA, have been making numerous calls for Minister Bekele to be fired, yet the President seems to be very reluctant while the rest of us remain unsafe on the ground. What do you think are the reasons behind this?
Well, the President remains a lame duck as far as his cabinet is concerned. He simply can't make the decisions that he needs to make. And the politicization of SAPS is an incredible concern for us. You've got General Ketla Setole appointed by Jacob Zuma. You've got Minister Bekele appointed by Cyril Ramaphosa. And the only man who has the power to really overhaul the top management of the police is the President. He employs the National Police Commissioner and he employs the Minister. And that is what we need to be pushing for this year. We need to call for action from the President. If we're going to make a change in the South African Police Service, it has to start by removing the National Police Commissioner and removing Minister Cele once and for all, regardless of his internal political squabbles within the ANC and Cabinet.
Okay, captured. Right. What are your final parting sentiments? What is your mandate to the President tonight?
Well, I suppose let's start with that. He needs to fire Minister Bekele and he needs to fire the National Police Commissioner. He needs to employ capable, fit-for-purpose people who can get the job done, who can start to turn it around. We're about to lose 20,000 police officers in South Africa over the next 3 years, and it's simply untenable. We're only bringing in 7,000 trainees, so he needs to accelerate the trainee program, bring more boots on the ground, cut the VIP protection budget in half and allocate that money to the visible policing budget, which is our frontline defense against crime in our communities. Partnerships with private security and neighborhood watches and community police forums. The solutions are here. We've got them for you, Mr. President. The DA has the policies to get things done. Listen to us, and we can help to make this country everything it deserves to be.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrew.
Since the release of last year's matric results, education has been at the forefront of everyone's minds. Recently, it was revealed that South Africans, on average, scored only 54% on a primary school maths test. South African 10-year-olds no less than their 9-year-old peers before the COVID-19 pandemic. Only recently did the government drop the rotational school system after the DA filed its court papers. There is clearly a crisis in our education system, with millions of learners having dropped out since 2010.
It's been a tough 2 years for schooling in South Africa. The academic years were interrupted a number of times. While some pupils could do online learning, many others simply had no access.
There are concerns that the continued state of disaster will negatively impact teaching and learning.
Even before the pandemic, about 40% of learners who started school in grade 1 do not complete matric.
The hard truth is that our education system is still dogged by stark inequalities.
The number of pupils not returning to school is now the highest in 2 decades.
Now, the majority of South Africans tertiary students are concerned about the country's future over the next 5 years due to prevalent corruption, soaring unemployment, and the economic devastation caused by COVID-19.
Early last year, university students took to the streets to protest fees increases.
In 2017, at least, about 39% of our students did not feel so confident that they would be able to find employment after they've completed their studies. And that number has now risen to 55%.
It's unacceptable that we have to bear the brunt of mismanagement. It's highly unacceptable, and we stand here in absolute anger.
Is it possible to have a sense of normality at our tertiary institutions in any year, COVID or no COVID? I mean, this is what we've seen year in and year out. How do we get it right?
Yes, indeed, education is the cornerstone of our future, and it's something that all parents have been so worried about the last few years, and even before COVID made it so difficult for us to run our schools. Courtney Clark has sent in a question saying, are schools fully open again? I'm worried about the social development of my daughter. And we've heard a lot about schools being closed, being open, the rotational system, which we must say the DA really pushed hard to get done away with. And we're very happy that we were listened to, and that did happen. But yeah, I mean, schools are fully open, as I understand, but some schools are not able to because they're not prepared. They don't have the teachers coming back in time. It's for a parent a very worrying factor.
I would be absolutely worried, to the bottom of my heart if I was a parent with a learner, Richard, because even with the rotational system being scrapped, there's still certain COVID protocols required around social distancing and the use of physical partitioning, which many schools can't afford or they haven't got the space for it. It's simply an exacerbation and a deepening of the overcrowding in classrooms issue we've had for many, many years, especially in our most under-resourced schools. So we really need a complete shift to a more innovative approach, and we need to get the basics right in the public education sector around resourcing, staff allocation, and making sure we deliver the best education outcomes for our learners, the ones who need the most opportunity.
And I think most of the problems that learners face go further than just what the department is or isn't doing. And Marcus Ndau brings it up in his question. He says, government's inability to address socio-economic issues is destroying South Africa's future. It's time to save our children and build a capable state. But if we look at what our children have to go through, there's infrastructure. Yeah. There's a problem with infrastructure. There's teachers who are unionized and are fighting with other teachers and not doing their work. There are kids who don't get a proper meal and come to school weak and unable to actually study. So it's a whole basket of things that need to come together. And unless they come together, our children are going to be on the back foot in education all the time.
Yeah, well, The Economist ran an article a couple of years ago that said, and the headline was quite telling, it said South Africa has the world's worst education system, full stop. And they justified it by using standardized global test outcomes, South Africa's own statistics on throughput rates, our math and science results, our language results, literacy rates at various grades. And by every measure, South Africa is near the bottom of the world in the education system. There are war-torn countries that could give their kids better education than South Africa. This really is an indictment. And then there was a report by Professor Volmink a couple of years ago that said that in 6 provinces, 6 of the 9 provinces in this country, SADTU had seized control of the administration of education. So if you want a promotion in a school or you want to be employed as a teacher, you don't go through the education system, and the department itself administratively is a sham. The union controls it, and they dictate who gets promoted, they dictate who gets a job as a principal, and you can't manage people and manage outcomes and make sure that teachers can teach the subjects that they're teaching in this environment. Of course, there's been no action ever taken in that report, and the minister sort of dusted it off and pushed it aside after a while, and it really is a fundamental problem. And so this then leads to bad outcomes later on in life. You've got problems from ECD to primary school to high school, and then you let someone through the system that can't read or write. Of course, they're going to struggle to find a job. They're going to engage in antisocial behavior and all sorts of other things. But at its core, it sits with cadre deployment and of a special kind, to borrow the ANC's terminology, of a special kind, in the form of SADTU capturing the entire education system. And until you break that, you're going to be stuck with poor outcomes.
Yeah, and yes, sir.
Yeah, but also just going back to your original question, which was about the social issues within that children experience. I think one thing that we also really fail to talk about in this country is just how incredibly overburdened a lot of our educators are. So because of the social issues that many of these learners experience within their communities, teachers have often become the psychologists and the counselors at the school and the punching bags in some cases. And so I think another aspect to the education crisis in South Africa is the fact that we're just not making the job more attractive for more people to want to become teachers, and so that's also something to think about.
On the flip side, we have to, in this country, all of us have become experts at looking for silver linings. I read the most remarkable article in a prominent newspaper at the end of last year, and it was about a committed, dedicated school principal in Umlazi in KwaZulu-Natal. And this school principal had become the principal, and year on year the matric pass rate was below 50% or so. And he looked around and he said the reason that these kids are failing matric is not because they have got no desire to pass matric, but it's because of the socio-economic conditions. They're going home to shacks, they're child-headed households, they've got no electricity, they're having to study by candlelight, 6-7 people in a room. And he said he was going to pilot a program where the kids were going to sleep throughout the matric final period in the school hall, girls and boys separately, educators, minding them over the weekend. And they did it the year before last, and they increased their pass rate to in the 70s, and they did it again this year. And they got volunteers. One volunteer was being paid 2,000 Rand a month from the governing body, full-time work. And it's innovation from ordinary men and women, committed civil servants that are going to turn this country around in the absence of political will. And Tammy's right to say that our educators are overburdened, but they're also equally so. Many of them politically motivated by trade unions. But we've got to keep looking for the silver linings and for the men and women like that principal who are making change.
And I think we need to also add that those people who come up with those plans, they shouldn't then be discarded by the department who say, okay, so you're on your own, you seem to be doing okay. They need to say, this is a great case study, let's take it forward.
Roll it out.
Let's roll it out in other places with as much support as we can give them. And I mean, one of the basic issues that I always hear people talking about is, we talk about dignity. We always talk about dignity in South Africa because it is such a critical part of what we do. And yet we have thousands and thousands of schools with pit toilets. You talk about the Blue Light Brigade and that money.
2,100 of them.
How can we not put that at the head of our priority list? Surely that's what we should do. And we spend millions and billions on wasteful expenditure, but we can't replace pit toilets.
Political will, Rich. Political will.
I think you'll remember, Richard, that's it would have been during the Zuma administration, there was a promise made that pit latrines or pit toilets were going to be eliminated, not just from public schools, but eliminated entirely in the country by, I think it was 2014 was the declared deadline.
And Sisulu made the same promise when she was the Minister of Water and Sanitation and Human Settlements to eradicate bucket toilets.
2014 came and went, and broken promises. And that's because of its corruption, its cadre deployment, it's that festering pit of everything wrong with the ANC, which means that we can't make progress, and it's selfish, narrow, venal interests that take priority over public interests and the future of our kids.
Well, let's go across to the City Hall, where our expert, the DA Shadow Minister of Basic Education, Bax Nodada, will be standing by with Karabu to give us his interpretation.
Olile, there's been a lot of conversations around the country around the impact of COVID-19 regulations on the schooling system. What, according to your understanding, was the impact, and how do you think the President can roll out a strategy to help learners and teachers recover?
Look, first and foremost, we all know that the rotational learning was really devastating for learners, because majority of the learners across the country have lost, close to 50% of their learning and teaching time. Worse is for rural and township schools that have lost between 50 and 80% of their learning and teaching time. Expo, which is a good researcher in education, has indicated that a grade 3 learner in June this year will only know what a grade 2 learner knew in 2019. So these are some of the challenges that we have, and that exacerbates the already unequal education system that we already have. And those are one of the biggest challenges we had during COVID-19. And that's why, as the Democratic Alliance, we actually went to court to scrap the rotational learning and the 1 meter social distancing. And I think moving forward, what is most important now is to have a curriculum recovery plan that is actually funded by government, because these learners will take between 10 and 15 years just to recover. First and foremost, we need to ensure that we try and get retired teachers to come on board to give extra lessons, and we must fund that. If we decide to extend the school day, that must also be funded, because teachers already are demoralized, and we need to incentivize them to make sure that they cover the curriculum. Speaking of recovery, we know that millions of students have dropped out of the schooling system altogether. How much of a crisis is this exactly? Look, dropouts are a massive crisis. There's 1 million worth of learners that have actually dropped out of the system from 2010 already. And during the COVID-19 period, it was between 350,000 to 750,000 learners that actually left the system in its entirety. So it's important for the department to ensure that there's a track, tracing and retention strategy, working with the Department of Social Development, to ensure that we get these learners back in school. Because otherwise, if we leave them out of school, that's why you will see a lot of Nyawope boys, you will see a lot of crime increasing in these communities, and you will see that there's a lot of youth not in education, employment and training, 3.3 million of them according to Stats SA, and I'm sure we're all aware of the high youth unemployment that these learners then go and contribute to. So it's important for us to rope in social development. It's important for us to have tracking, tracing and learner retention strategies from schools to provinces as well, working with a whole government approach, and well as communities and parents trying to come on board to solve the crisis. Okay. Parting shots, what is your mandate to the President tonight? Look, for the President, first and foremost, we need, like I said, there must be a learner retention, dropout and tracking strategy for those learners that actually have dropped out, so that we can get back them into schooling. The second thing is for the President to talk about infrastructure. There's 1 billion that has been underspent. We've got over 2,111 pit toilets in schools. We've got 7,200 schools that have no fence. And we've got schools that are still made of mud and asbestos that have been removed from the list. So in order for us to create a conducive learning environment for learners, we need to make sure that we pump in the money in there and we build and get rid of these schools with pit toilets and mud on time. Thirdly, there must be a strategy on online and homeschool education, and that must be funded to alleviate the pressure of the admissions policies in schools where some learners actually don't find placement. And as we speak, there's only 29% of schools that have access to internet, or what we call network, in our country. So there must be a strategy to how do we best make sure that they've got network, so that we can be able to develop an online and homeschool policy for them to be online learning. And then lastly, I think it's very, very important for the government to ensure that the funding for the equitable share into provinces is increased for learners with special needs, so that they are calculated into that, to change the quintile system so that children and parents that can't afford schooling are not put in a quintile front of our school to forced to be pay school fees when they're supposed to be a no-fee paying school. So those are some of the things that I think the President needs to address today for us to try and change our education system for the better.
Max, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Eskom. Recently, our national power provider asked for an increase in fees of more than 20%. Yet, as we speak, there are people experiencing rolling blackouts across the country. We have heard for years that load shedding will be a thing of the past. Yet SONA after SONA after SONA, we hear promises but still sit in darkness. This is having a devastating impact on the lives of every single South African and destroying our economy. It's almost hard to believe that there are teenagers in South Africa who have never lived in a load-shedding-free country.
Keeping the lights on all continues to be a challenge for Eskom.
The power utility is facing major challenges.
Blackouts have unfortunately become a way of life in South Africa.
People won't be able to afford electricity with the ever-increasing hikes brought by power utility Eskom. It would have been a different situation if Eskom did not receive bailouts or did not receive government guarantees, and this is why they can't keep the lights on, but they have received billions.
More corruption claims coming to light around the Medupi and Kusile projects on the back of charges brought against former executives of the parastatal. Eskom's broken promises on load shedding are catching up with the utility.
Why are we still in this mess?
All we get as the general population is that things are going to get better, they will try their best, but there doesn't seem to be any political will to deal with the Eskom crisis once and for all.
South Africa's biggest liability is Eskom.
The key thing is Eskom's payroll. It has never employed more people and it has never delivered less electricity.
Consumers can just no longer afford to pay for the current prices of electricity that they do.
You're absolutely right. It underscores the urgency with which we have to reduce our country's reliance on Eskom.
Load shedding, power failures, rolling blackouts, call it what you want, it's people left in the dark. And Joel Foster's sent us a question saying more blackouts on the cards in 2022 than there were in 2021. How is this possible? And it was about a week and a half ago that Eskom said, this is how much you had in 2021, it's going to be more in 2022. And by the way, we need some more money. How is this even possible?
Well, it's years and years of state capture, and preceded by years and years of a failure to do any maintenance or upgrading of power plants. And so you've got one of the oldest energy fleets in the world. But not only are you getting more blackouts, but it's going to be more expensive as well. You're going to be paying more for less. And it's possible because of, as we saw in the clip, Eskom's massively inflated staff bill, many of which are management positions that actually don't have anything to do with energy generation. As well as years and years of tender fraud. And we've seen with some of the state capture reports that have come through and some of the testimony of the Zonda Commission, how Eskom was looted during the period of state capture, how Medupi and Kusile came in massively over budget, not performing, the units not generating the amount of electricity anticipated. Some of the dirtiest energy in the world as well. And we might not be one of the biggest economies in the world, but we certainly are up there as one of the biggest polluters. But we're not generating enough. And so this toxic mix of an aging fleet, a looted entity, an energy monopoly to the state has now come to its natural end consequence, which is less electricity, but you pay more for it.
And I think South Africans have got so used to this type of thing. I mean, we've all forgotten about the Guptas. Remember how deep they were involved with the coal mines that were being bought, substandard coal that was being given to power stations. And this is something that you can't change overnight, but it's something that the people are looking to the DA and others who have some plans to change.
Absolutely, Richard. And I mean, apart from the sort of technical factors that that Ashore has outlined around, how the middle management bloats, HR managements, and so on fit into the Eskom crisis. We also can't forget how other political policies like BEE have directly contributed to Eskom's collapse, because if you prioritize, demographic factors over competence, especially with your managers and with your technicians, once you lose that institutional memory and that experience, it's very hard to get it back. And now the burden and the problem is bigger to address with less capacity. So it's a whole basket of issues that need to be fixed. And the first step out of that is to move away from the energy monopoly.
Yeah. That brings us to the next question that's come in from Vincent Thomas, who says 20% price hike after 20% price hike. It's killing us. We pay more, but we get less. I can't afford this. And this is what we were saying is, people, 20% is massive in anything. And when it's for something that you're not getting more of, but you're getting less of, 20% is unaffordable for so many people. Actually, you and I were chatting about this earlier.
Yeah, well, thankfully, DA mayors across the country are now objecting to the tariff increases at NERSA. From Cape Town to Ekurhuleni to Tshwane to Makale City, I've seen DA mayor after DA mayor lodge this in. But we've been dealing with these price hikes now above inflation since 2007. Remember when load shedding first hit, and I was still a kid in high school, the Eskom applied for a 33% increase a year for 3 years and said, that's what we need for a cost-reflective tariff. To this day, we've got now the current CEO of Eskom, Andre de Ruyter, saying we need to move to a cost-reflective tariff. We're not paying for the cost of generating electricity, we're paying for the cost of corruption now. And it's not coming out of the people who stole and looted from Eskom and from this country, it's coming out of the pockets of every citizen. And so your salary might only be going up by inflation or less, 5 or 6%, but your electricity goes up by 20 to 30% a year. That compounds over time. And whereas 10 years ago you might have been paying 400 Rand a month for electricity, and now paying 1,200 Rand a month to use the same amount of electricity. And it becomes unmanageable, it destroys household budgets, it means that people have got to cut back on spending all sorts of other things. And particularly if you're low income or low middle income, then you're making choices between food and electricity. You're making choices between textbooks and electricity. And these are not trade-offs that working people, poor people should have to make.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's to pay for the ballooning debt, Ashore, as you say, as a result of state capture. I mean, I was reading earlier this week that Eskom's debt this year is now sitting at over 401 billion Rand. They've reported a loss of 18.9 billion Rand. And it's the consumer, it's the middle class electricity user who's paying that, notwithstanding the fact that last year, South Africa saw the highest number of load shedding hours at over 1,100 hours that were load shed. We love to call it load shedding in South Africa, but I think that we need to just simply get used to using the term rolling blackouts. Yeah. Call it what it is.
It's power outage.
Power outage just because the state has failed.
Yeah. Or just call it economy shedding.
Economy shedding, job shedding, what it is.
But what makes it even worse is, in South Africa, you actually pay multiple times for the same electricity, because you pay your bill, but then the state, you pay taxes to the state. The state gives Eskom a bailout. For the last 3 years, it's been 20 billion a year, over and above the regular allocation. There's a special allocation that was passed in 2019 that says Eskom will get 20 billion a year for 3 years, in addition to getting a regular allocation. So you're paying for electricity twice, first through your bills and then through your taxes. Instead of spending your taxes on infrastructure, on things that create jobs, and teachers, as we were discussing, on police officers, you're paying for your electricity bill twice.
Dark days indeed. Remember, you can join our conversation by using the hashtag SONA2022, or you can post comments on our social media pages on Facebook and YouTube. The more you like and share our broadcast, the more people get to see the DA difference. Karabo is now standing by at City Hall with the DA Shadow Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Kevin Milam, to shed some light on this topic.
Kevin, South Africans are hot full of load shedding. What is the DA doing to fix the energy crisis in the country?
Absolutely. Last year we had record number of hours of load shedding in South Africa, 1,150 to be precise. And so the DA governments, particularly here in the Western Cape, but across the country too, but in the Western Cape, the province has put in place a municipal energy resilience plan, which is funding municipalities' independence from Eskom. It's giving them the resources to plan and develop their own energy sources. And so, for example, we are seeing that the City of Cape Town in the next couple of weeks will be issuing tenders to independent power producers to allow them to take electricity directly as opposed to buying from Eskom. And other municipalities, Stellenbosch, Drakenstein, George, are doing similar things.
So obviously fuel hikes, the proposed electricity hike has devastating effects on the state of living and the cost of living altogether. So are these hikes avoidable?
Absolutely. What we need to do as a country is we need to review our fuel pricing mechanism. We need to make sure that the taxes that are inherent in the fuel price are taken out. We need to go back to a base pricing level to make our fuel affordable, because obviously fuel prices have a knock-on effect, as do electricity prices, have a knock-on effect on all other production and transport and commercial activities. Similarly with electricity, we've seen that the price of renewable energies have come down significantly over the last couple of years, and it's now cheaper to purchase renewable electricity than it is to buy coal or nuclear. Those are avoidable.
Okay, tell me then, parting shots, what is your mandate to the President tonight?
The President must absolutely first and foremost make it easier for municipalities to purchase electricity directly. Secondly, he needs to make sure that the grid is opened up to independent power producers. And then he needs to incentivize energy efficiency and electricity production by consumers and businesses.
Thank you, Kevin.
Part 2 of the state capture report details how key state-owned enterprises were systematically looted, stealing billions of rands of your tax money. The report implicates high-ranking ANC officials. But how many convictions have we seen? None. Nix, nada, not a single one. It's time for accountability. Mr. President, it's time to put your country before your party. If the President cared about this country, he would name, shame, and ensure prosecutions of all those implicated. South Africans lose over 500,000 rand every minute due to corruption. That's 800 million rand per day and 300 billion rand per year. That is the true state of the nation.
Corruption is a massive problem in South Africa.
The country has lost over, listen to this, 1.5 trillion. 1.5 trillion rand between 2014 and 2019. And that was before the PPE corruption.
The SIU found that nearly 3,000 PPE contracts were irregular.
Lots of tenders, lots of kickbacks, lots of dodgy deals. But the cost actually goes way beyond the looting. The fact is, we've struggled to grow our economy for the past decade. And here's the thing, economists are pointing to bad governance.
Every day, the people of this country see the horror of ongoing state capture on full display in front of the Zondo Commission.
Rolling blackouts, water shortages, a shaky healthcare system and myriad other state failures. Others say this is the cost of corruption and negligent leadership.
ANC says it's feeling the heat when it comes to corruption, but many South Africans will say, never mind the heat, our house is on fire.
53% of South Africans believe that corruption in South Africa has actually gotten worse under the Ramaphosa administration.
People today talk about the ANC, and it's almost as if the name ANC becomes synonymous with corruption.
Welcome back. Corruption and state capture. I mean, that is, you couldn't make the stuff up that we're seeing in the country. And it's impacting on the lives of every single South African. Jason White sent in a comment here saying, the Zondo report has been released. What now? And indeed, what now? We've seen part 1 and part 2, part 3 still to come. But it's the impact of that report that is going to either make South Africans stand up and cheer or reach for the tissue box.
Yeah, well, I think what we've seen is from these reports is that there are a couple of key enablers to state capture. The first, of course, is cadre deployment. There's this idea that your loyalty as a civil servant is not to the people of the country that you're serving. It is to the political party that has put you there. And when the state begins to interfere in the appointment of civil servants and then judges and all sorts of things that are meant to be impartial in an institution, they completely destroy the impartiality of these institutions and the ability of these institutions to deliver for everybody. And so loyalty to the party eventually becomes loyalty to party factions, or loyalty to individuals in the party. And you end up in municipalities, for example, with this perverted system where you might be the regional secretary of the governing party, and you are appointed as a civil servant, and then you've got the mayor who is less senior than you in the party. And so the mayor can't tell the municipal manager what to do because the municipal manager has political positions that is more senior to the mayor, and so you can't then sort it out even if you have the best of intentions because the party is supreme. So that's the first enabler. The second enabler is BEE, because what we saw during state capture in particular was that the system very conveniently uses the idea of race to cover up for the enrichment of a politically connected few. And so that fig leaf then creates an entire system that, together with this loyalty to the party, that ensures that you only empower people who are loyal to the party. And this, of course, is a consequence of a party that has institutionalized corruption, and that is the ANC. And it's going to be quite interesting watching the president give his SONA tonight against the backdrop of the Zondo report. And also, effectively, he might still have his parliamentary majority from the 2019 election, but the 2021 election showed us that he now walks into parliament with just 46% of the vote in the country. The ANC has lost its national majority, and he's not speaking from a position of strength where the party's supremacy counts for everything because the voters have given up on the party. They've lost their national majority, and it'll be interesting to see if he acknowledges that in his response tonight, in his speech tonight, and if he acknowledges these enablers of state capture in his speech tonight and announces any reforms. I'm not holding my breath, but one certainly, can't help but hope that maybe the election result has made them see the light. But if they haven't and they're going to continue down the same arrogant path of all loyalty to the party, I have no doubt the voters are going to continue to shock them more than the president himself can be shocked.
But Ash, we have to also ask ourselves how serious President Ramaphosa is about addressing corruption. So we've spent R1 billion, I think it is, on the Zondo Commission. But in Ramaphosa's SONA last year, he promised the nation that he was going to establish a national anti-corruption advisory council. And to date, that council has not yet been created. And it's the DA who are going to now, through a private member's bill, be bringing or trying to pass a bill that will enable such a council and an anti-corruption, essentially another Chapter 9 institution that deals with corruption. And when we look at the number of cases that the SIU, the Special Investigating Unit, have referred to the Hawks that have emanated out of state capture and the various investigations that have been done, notwithstanding the Zondo Commission, into corruption. We see that there's over, I think, 380 cases that have been referred by the SIU to the Hawks for investigation. But we see with the resignation of Cronje that the Hawks is desperately under-resourced. And where the SIU have referred cases back to government to take internal discipline against officials, we've got the senior leaders of the SIU and of the Hawks saying government is simply not taking disciplinary action against these officials who've been embroiled. So we've got this veil or this illusion that is being created by the president and by some of his cabinet members that the ANC's tough on fighting corruption, but the resources aren't trickling down and they're not putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah. And I think we need to remember that the DA's Leon Schreiber connected the dots, so to speak, between state capture and Cadre deployment, which was brushed under the table, and he is at City Hall right now. So we'd like to thank our viewers again for all the responses you're sending in. Keep them coming. Remember, hashtag SONA 2022. Like and share this broadcast with your friends and family, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date. Karabu is ready for us now at City Hall with the DA Shadow Minister for Public Service and Administration, the man, as we said now, who joined those dots, Dr. Leon Schreiber.
Leon, it is no secret that each and every ANC government is corrupt and incompetent. Yet the ANC is so married to their cadre deployment policy. Why do you think this is such a bad policy?
Well, cadre deployment is really the foundation of state capture and corruption in South Africa. It's a system that was deliberately adopted by the ANC towards the late 90s with the explicit goal of capturing control over all levers of power in the state and society. Now, unfortunately, the ANC has gotten exactly what they wished for with this policy. They've created, in effect, a shadow state in the background with secret meetings in Luthuli House that decide well ahead of time who should be appointed to positions of power, not only in government departments, but also in state-owned enterprises. So through this mechanism of cadre deployment, the ANC actually subverts the legal appointment process where there are selection panels and people supposedly interviewing and selecting candidates, when in fact those people have already been instructed in the background by the ANC of who they should appoint. So cadre deployment is the mechanism that put corrupt people into positions of power, and of course from there they use those positions of power to benefit the ANC, to benefit their own pockets, and at the end of the day not serve the people of South Africa. So if we are serious about building a capable state and actually serving the people rather than the interests of the ANC, then cadre deployment is at the heart of that problem and needs to be scrapped, done away with, because that's the only way we'll really tackle state capture.
Yeah, I mean, we have the state capture report that has just come out now, but even prior that, everybody knew that we have fat cats in every office, but none of them actually end up behind bars. Do you think the president will address this?
I think the president will symbolically gesture towards the Zondo Commission and the fact that it is close to completing its work. But as for action based on what's contained in those first two reports, I don't think we'll see anything. And that's a real shame, because we already know that cabinet ministers like Gwede Mantashe have been explicitly mentioned in that report as people facilitating state capture. The problem for the president is that the third and final Zondo Commission report will hopefully go much deeper into the mechanisms behind state capture, of which cadre deployment is likely to be the biggest one. And of course, President Ramaphosa was the chairperson of the deployment committee between 2013 and 2018. So once we reach that stage, and hopefully Acting Chief Justice Zondo confronts this reality in the final report, it's going to be very difficult for the president to credibly sell to the people of South Africa that he's serious about acting against state capture and the system of cadre deployment, because he was the chairperson of this commission and it will likely implicate his whole political party.
Parting shots, what is your mandate to the president tonight?
Well, the president really should, if he wants to put the interests of South Africa first, stand up here tonight and say that he is scrapping the policy of cadre deployment, because it has been a monumental failure for South Africa. It has hollowed out our state capacity and it's actually tearing at our social fabric in South Africa. So that is what someone who puts the interests of the country first above the interests of his political party would actually do. The problem is that we have a long record now of President Ramaphosa consistently putting the interests of the ANC above that of the country, and unfortunately that's likely to happen again tonight, and I think it's unlikely that he'll stand up and confront cadre deployment for the evil that it really is.
Leon, thank you.
Thank you.
If you've just joined us, welcome. You're watching the DA's live broadcast of SONA 2022. For the past hour, we've been discussing the key issues facing South Africa. We've heard from various members of Parliament and our in-studio panel. But before we hear from the President, let's cross over to City Hall and speak to DA Leader John Steenhuisen.
John, President Ramaphosa has pretty much been crippled with inaction. Do you think we can expect any meaningful announcements tonight?
I definitely don't think so. I think that the president is under significant pressure in his own party. It's an election year for him at the NGC. I think he's going to play a very safe bat tonight. I don't think we're going to get any of the big, bold, brave reforms that are required for South Africa to get out of the terrible trajectory we find ourselves on and onto one in which we're going to be able to have growth and prosperity in the country. I think that South Africans at home, particularly the 30 million people that are trapped in poverty, that live below the poverty line, people are going to bed hungry every night, people whose children have dropped out of schools, are going to hear a lot of things about hope tonight. I think what they're going to miss out on is the real clear action steps that are going to take us there. I think there's going to be a lot of more of the same, more promises around prosecutions for corruption, but we know they never end up happening. Jobs that are going to be created, and we know that we're losing jobs after every SONA. Action taken against errant cabinet ministers who don't perform, and yet they're retained in their position. So I think that tonight we're going to have the more of the same approach, and I think that until we can break the logjam in South African politics and to start to smash through, like we've done in the metros, bring the ANC below 50%, start to get the country moving forward again through a new government in place that's going to be able to really drive and own the reform agenda in South Africa. That's the only hope that's on the horizon for the poor in South Africa.
What should the top priorities be for the President's address tonight?
Well, one has to be the economy, and underlying that is the whole issue around ending the state of disaster. We've got to bring the state of disaster to an end. It's of no use anymore. The pandemic is now endemic in South Africa, and we've got to learn to live with the virus. We've got to get people back to work, businesses back up and running again. Secondly, we live in an unsafe society. Murder's up, GBV is up, crimes are up. People feel unsafe in their homes and on the streets. And at the same time, you've got a police minister who's too busy fighting the National Police Commissioner to actually worry about crime. So the war on crime is being lost on the streets of South Africa as it rages within the structures of the SAPS. The security agency, we saw how the latest report laying bare how useless it was in the July riots. And we've been sitting again since 2018 when the Mufamadi Commission was established. None of those reforms were done. Had they been done, we probably would have had a state security agency able to get those reforms. Then making sure that we focus on education, the opportunity side of the economy. Poor children and poor communities have lost up to 50% of their learning. They've lost literacy, they've lost numeracy. And what we're going to do if we don't announce a plan tonight to really catch up that time and invest in those young people, we're going to end up with another lost generation of unemployed, unskilled South Africans who have no hope for the future. So the President has to announce key reforms around that. And then we've got to get serious about energy. We cannot continue year after year. The President promised us we're dealing with load shedding, we're dealing with Eskom. Whatever they're doing, it's not working. We're still sitting with load shedding. We still can't supply power in large parts of the country. Unleash RPPs, unleash municipalities to be able to get away from the restrictions being applied by the National Minister and generate supply electricity so we can keep the lights on in homes, we can keep the factories running, and we can keep the jobs rolling in.
There you have it, South Africa. Back to you in studio, Richard.
Thank you, Karabo. Thank you, John Steenhuisen. Yes, I think we've heard over the last few days, starting with the true State of the Nation address that John delivered in Cape Town, and some of the comments he's made today, the interviews he's done on television. I don't think anyone's in any doubt as to what the DA expects from this SONA and what we need to see. And it'll be very interesting to see how many of these issues are raised by the President, how many may be swept under the table. A big moment has arrived. The President, will he be announcing meaningful action? Will we be talking about bullet trains and smart cities? Let's find out. We now cross live to the inside of the Cape Town City Hall for the President's SONA Address 2022.
Please be seated. Honorable members and guests, in the interest of safety for all present in the chamber, we request that you please keep your masks on and sit in your designated area. Thank you. Honorable members, The President has called this joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces in terms of Section 84(2)(d) of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, read with Joint Rule 7(1)(a), in order to deliver his State of the Nation address to Parliament. I now call on the Honourable the President to address the joint sitting.
Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula, the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Mr. Amos Masondo, Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. David Dabede Mabuza, former President of the Republic of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, former Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, former Deputy President Ms. Balega Mbete, former Speaker of the National Assembly, Max Sisulu, Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, Mayor of the City of Cape Town, whom we thank for making this venue available, Mr. Gordon Hill-Lewis, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, Mr. Bene Mpoko, members of the judiciary, heads of institutions supporting our democracy, all of you as members of Parliament and fellow South Africans. Good evening, Dimadekwana, Riperile, Dumelang, Sanbonani, Huyenant. This year, for the first time since the dawn of our democracy, this State of the Nation address is being delivered with us not being in the chamber of the National Assembly. As we entered this new year, a huge fire engulfed the seat of our democracy. We all watched in outrage and sadness as the flames devoured the buildings in which our democratic constitution was born, in which laws of transformation and progress have been passed, a house in which the freely chosen representatives of the people of our country have shaped our young nation. For many, what happened in Parliament speaks to a much broader devastation in our land. For many, the fire was symbolic of the devastation caused by COVID-19, by rising unemployment and deepening poverty in our country. It spoke to the devastation of a pandemic that over the past 2 years has taken the lives of tens of thousands of South Africans, put 2 million people out of work, and brought misery to many families in our country. The fire in Parliament reminded us of the destruction, the violence, and the looting that we witnessed in parts of our country in July last year, of the more than 300 lives lost and many more livelihoods that were ruined. As we reflect on the past year, we recall the words of our former President Thabo Mbeki, who reminded us that, and he said, "Trying times need courage and resilience." And he continued to say, "Our strength as a people is not tested during the best of times," meaning that it is during the worst of times that our courage is really truly tested. That we are gathered together in Cape Town City Hall instead of the National Assembly reflects the extraordinary circumstances of this time. It reflects the determination of our presiding officers and indeed all members of the two houses of Parliament who determined that the work of this democratic institution should continue without interruption. And I applaud our presiding officers and all of you. There are moments in the life of a nation when old certainties are unsettled and new possibilities emerge. In these moments, there is both the prospect of great progress and the risk of reversal. Today, we are faced with such a moment. The path that we choose now will determine the course for future generations. That is why we are taking steps to strengthen our democracy and reaffirm our commitment to a constitution that protects us all, the most wonderful constitution in the world. We are working together to revitalize our economy and end the inequality and injustice that impedes our progress as a nation. We are standing together against corruption and to ensure that those who are responsible for state capture will be punished for their crimes. We are rebuilding the state and restoring trust and pride in our public institutions. If there is one thing we all agree on, it is that the present situation that we are in now, of deep poverty, unemployment, and inequality, is unacceptable and unsustainable. There is agreement amongst a broad and diverse range of South Africans that fundamental change and fundamental reforms are needed to revive economic growth in our country. There is a need both to address the immediate crisis and to create conditions for long-lasting stability and development. To achieve this, South Africa needs a new consensus, a consensus that is born out of a common understanding of our current challenging situation and a recognition of the need to address the challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. This should be a new consensus which recognizes that the state must create an environment in which the private sector can invest and unleash the dynamism of our economy. But equally, it is also an environment in which South Africans can live a better life and unleash the energy of their capabilities. This should also be a new consensus which embraces our shared responsibility to one another as South Africans and acknowledges that we are all in this together, and together we must find solutions that will take our nation forward. As the social partners, being government, labor, business, and community-based entities, we are working to determine the actions we will take together to build such a consensus. We have begun discussions on what trade-offs are needed and what contribution we will each need to make to take this country forward. We have given ourselves 100 days to finalize what I call a comprehensive social compact to grow our economy, to create jobs, and to combat hunger. This work will build on the foundation of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, which we adopted, which remains our common program to rebuild the economy. We remain focused on the priorities we identified in the State of the Nation last year, they being overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic, a massive rollout of infrastructure, a substantial increase in local production, and employment stimulus to create jobs and support livelihoods, and the rapid expansion of our energy generation capacity. To be effective, this social compact needs to include every South African and every part of our society. In the end, we must all be imbued with the understanding that no one must be left behind. So, fellow South Africans, when I last addressed the state of our nation, we were deep in the throes of the worst pandemic in more than a century. Since COVID-19 reached our shores, we have endured successive waves of infection, the emergence of new variants, and the devastating cost of nearly 100,000 recorded COVID-19 deaths. South Africans have responded to this grave threat with great courage and resilience, but also with compassion and restraint. Over the past 2 years, we have taken unprecedented actions to strengthen our health system, to build laboratory capacity and prevent infections. The nation owes a great debt of gratitude to the dedicated health workers and to other frontline staff who put their own health and their own lives at risk to care for the ill and the vulnerable during this period. Within 2 weeks of the first reported infection in our country, I announced the establishment of the Solidarity Fund with the goal of uniting the country in the fight against the pandemic. In a wave of generosity that we have never seen before in our country, a wave of generosity that swept throughout the country, the fund raised 3.4 billion rand from more than 300,000 individual South Africans and companies. More than 400 individuals and 100 companies volunteered their time and services for free. The fund has played a pivotal role in supporting the national health response and alleviating the humanitarian crisis that confronted our country and our people. I would like to thank everyone who contributed to the Solidarity Fund, and many of those individuals who contributed were a number of you as members of Parliament. So I applaud you and I thank you and congratulate you for that. And I also congratulate and thank the countless other initiatives to support those affected by the pandemic. And they range from people who gave food parcels, people who went out of their way to care for those who were affected and infected by COVID-19. As the trajectory of the pandemic has continued to change, we have had to adapt and evolve. Our approach has been informed throughout by the best available scientific evidence, and we have stood out both for the quality of our scientists and for their involvement in every step of our response. During the past year, we have focused on accelerating our vaccine rollout. So far, we have, as a nation, administered some 30 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines. Consequently, nearly 42% of all adults and 60% of everyone over 50 years of age is fully vaccinated. And this is a real achievement that many countries on our continent have not been able to reach. We are now ready to enter a new phase in our management of the pandemic. It is our intention, and also my clear intention, to end the national state of disaster as soon as we have finalized We will do so as soon as we have finalized other measures under the National Health Act, as well as other legislation to manage and contain the pandemic. This we have to do. Now, all of you will know that by now, nearly all restrictions on economic and social activity have already been lifted. Vaccines have proven to be the best defense we have against illness and death from COVID-19. And I've always said, even from a personal point of view, that had I not been vaccinated in December when I contracted COVID-19, I probably would not be standing here before you. My defense was being vaccinated. If we all get vaccinated and continue to observe basic health measures and remain forever vigilant, we will be able to get on with our lives, even with the virus in our midst. The state of the nation is linked inextricably to the state of our economy. In addition to the divides of race, geography, education, status, COVID-19 has exacerbated the divide between those who are employed and those who are unemployed. Last year, our unemployment rate reached its highest recorded level. Unemployment has been caused by low growth, which has in turn resulted from long-term decline in investment in our economy, which has lasted for a number of years. In the last year, we have benefited from a clear and stable macroeconomic framework, from strong commodity prices, from mining, and a better than expected recovery. However, we've been held back by an unreliable electricity supply, the inefficient network industry, and the high cost of doing business in our country. We have been taking extraordinary measures to enable businesses to grow and create jobs alongside expanded public employment and social protection, which we have put in place. We all know that government does not create jobs. Businesses create jobs. Facts be faced, around 80% of all the people who are employed in South Africa are employed in the private sector. The key task of government is to create the conditions that will enable the private sector and this is the case whether we like it or not all over the world. It is when government creates that environment that will enable businesses, both small and big, to emerge, to grow, to access new markets, to create new products, and to hire more employees. The problems in the South African economy are deep, and they are also structural. When electricity supply cannot be guaranteed, when our railways and ports are inefficient, when innovation is held back by a scarcity of broadband spectrum, when water quality deteriorates in our municipalities and where we live, companies are reluctant to invest and the economy cannot function properly. With a view to addressing these challenges, we are accelerating the implementation of far-reaching structural reforms with a view to modernizing and transforming these industries, to unlock investment, to reduce the costs of doing business and to increase competitiveness and to heighten growth in our economy. The electricity crisis is one of the greatest threats to economic and social progress. In the last few days, we have once again been reminded of the fragility of our electricity system. Load shedding continues to have a huge impact on the lives of South Africans, disrupting businesses and placing additional strains on families and our communities. Due to our aging power stations, poor maintenance, policy missteps, and the ruinous effects of state capture, our country has a shortfall of around 4,000 megawatts of electricity. During the past year, we have taken firm steps to bring additional generation capacity online as quickly as possible to close this shortfall. As a result, several new energy generation projects will be coming online over the next few years, and this includes over 500 megawatts from the remaining projects in bid window 4 of the Renewable Energy Program, which are at an advanced stage of construction. Also includes 2,600 megawatts from bid window 5 of the Renewable Energy Program, for which the preferred bidders were announced last year. It also includes up to 800 megawatts from those risk mitigation power projects that are ready to proceed. We also include in this list 2,600 megawatts from bid window 6 of the Renewable Energy Program, which will soon be opened. 3,000 megawatts of gas power and 500 megawatts of battery storage, for which requests for proposals will be released later this year. Additionally, an estimated 4,000 megawatts from embedded generation projects that the mining industry is currently working on, and approximately 1,400 megawatts currently in the process of being secured by various municipalities once we opened the way for them to generate. In addition to closing the energy supply shortfall, we are implementing fundamental changes to the structure of the electricity sector. Eskom has established a separate transmission subsidiary and is on track to completing its own unbundling by December 2022. The utility has continued with its intensive maintenance program to reverse many years of neglected maintenance and underperformance of existing plants. To regulate all these reforms, Cabinet yesterday approved amendments to the Electricity Regulation Act for public comment. These far-reaching amendments will enable a competitive market for electricity generation and the establishment of an independent state-owned transmission company. Our economy cannot grow without efficient ports and railways. Over several years, the functioning of our ports has declined relative to ports in other parts of the world, and particularly on our own continent as well. This constrains economic growth and holds us back from acceding to higher levels of economic growth. The agricultural sector, for example, relies heavily on efficient, well-run ports to export their produce to overseas markets. The Minister of Agriculture was telling me that we've now opened the Chinese market for citrus, for a number of other products that we produce or we grow here. And we therefore need efficient ports to be able to export all that produce to high demanding markets like China and many other places. Fresh produce cannot wait for days and even weeks while stuck in a terminal. This hurts businesses and compromises our country's reputation as an exporter of fresh produce. And fresh produce also includes meat products and many others. Transnet, faced with all these challenges, is addressing these challenges and is currently focused on improving operational efficiencies at our ports through procuring additional equipment, implementing new systems to reduce congestion. I have been able to go to our ports and I have seen the work that Transnet is doing in this regard. And Transnet will soon ask for proposals from private partners for the Durban and the Ngqura container terminals within the next few months, which will enable partnerships to be in place at both terminals by October of 2022. Transnet will start the process of providing third-party access to its freight rail network from April 2022 by making slots available on the container corridor between Durban and City Deep in Gauteng. Transnet has developed partnerships with private sector entities to address cable theft, which has been paralyzing our railways, as well as to address vandalism on the freight rail network through advanced technologies and additional security personnel. Now, this collaborative effort is already showing results in reduced disruptions to the rail operations. The poor state of passenger rail in our country has a direct and detrimental impact on the lives of our people. We are therefore working hard to rehabilitate the passenger rail network in 10 priority corridors. The Southern Line in Cape Town and the Mabopane Line in Pretoria has been reopened to be followed by the remaining lines in the next year. One of the greatest constraints on the technological development of our economy has been the unacceptable which has taken years, unacceptable delay in the migration of broadcasting from analog to digital. The switch off of analog transmission has been completed in a number of provinces already. As I announced in the State of the Nation address last year, the other provinces will move to digital signal by the end of March 2022. And I have seen the joy that our people have when they gain access to digital and have the pleasure to watch television, which is clear, which has many more stations, and this we are going to continue doing. Now, as part of this process, government will continue to subsidize low-income households so that they can access a set-top box and make the switch to digital TV. Our communications regulator, ICASA, will commence with the process of auctioning the high-frequency communication spectrum in about 3 weeks from now. Now, this will unlock new spectrum for mobile telecommunications for the first time ever in over a decade. In addition, we will facilitate the rapid deployment of broadband infrastructure across all municipalities by establishing a standard model for the granting of municipal permissions. These reforms will revolutionize the country's technological development, making faster broadband accessible to more people, but more importantly, reducing the cost of digital communications. The world over, the ability to attract skilled immigrants is the hallmark of a modern, thriving economy. We are therefore streamlining the modernizing of the visa application process to make it easier to travel to South Africa for tourism, for business, for study, or even for work. As we committed last year, the e-visa system has now been launched in 14 countries, including mega countries such as China, India, Kenya, and Nigeria. The revised critical skills list has now already been published for the first time since 2014, following the detailed technical work and extensive consultations with business and labor. The updated list reflects the skills that are in shortage today to ensure that our immigration policy matches the demands of our economy. A comprehensive review of the work visa system is currently underway, led by former Director General of Home Affairs, Mr. Mavuso Msimang. This review is exploring the possibility of new visa categories that could enable economic growth, such as a startup visa and a remote working visa. Now, these are all the reforms that underpin and undergird the growth of our economy. Water is the most critical, precious natural resource to all of us as South Africans. It is vital to life, to development, as well as to economic growth. That is why we have prioritized institutional reforms in this area to ensure future water security, investment in water resources, and maintenance of existing assets. We have embarked on the process of institutional reform, incapacitating the Department of Water and Sanitation and reviewing water boards in as far as their mandates are concerned, and ensuring that they serve municipalities in terms of our district development model. Now, these reforms are being championed by a minister who's been to every water source in our country and has examined precisely what needs to be done. A comprehensive turnaround plan is being implemented to streamline the process for water use license applications. Now, these applications used to take forever, up to 3 years, and they are now being streamlined, and the target is to clear the backlog of applications by June 2022 and to process 80% of all applications within 90 days during the next financial year. Now, legislation has been prepared for the establishment of the National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency and will be published for public comment within the next month. The water quality monitoring system has been reinstated to improve enforcement of water standards at municipal level and to enable the Department of Water and Sanitation to intervene where water and sanitation services are failing. Now, this is how we are going to be able to make interventions even at the local level. When water is not provided to our people, we will be able to intervene and assist those municipalities. We will review the policy and regulatory framework for a whole number of other processes, but more importantly, which will come as sweet news for our people in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, for industrial hemp and cannabis to realize huge potential for investment and job creation. Now, this natural product, which our people have been farming with and harvesting for a number of purposes, is now going to be industrialized and no longer just being resorted to the smoke process. Many countries around the world have already advanced to higher levels. Our immediate neighbor in Lesotho has moved ahead on the industrialization of cannabis in leaps and bounds. And the products that are to be eked out of hemp and cannabis are in great demand around the world. We want to harness this so that we can release and unleash the energy of our ordinary farmers in the various parts of our country, especially in the Eastern Cape, as well as in KwaZulu-Natal, particularly in the Pondoland area. While structural reforms are necessary for us to revive economic growth, they are not enough on their own. And there are quite a number of other structural reforms that we are in conversation with the private sector, and we are ad idem in as far as how deep and how far we should go. This year we are undertaking far-reaching measures to unleash the potential of small businesses, micro businesses, and informal businesses. These are the businesses that create the most jobs and provide the most opportunities for poor people to earn a living. We have started discussions with social partners as part of the social compact to process a number of measures, and some of those will be how we enable small and medium enterprises to operate without too many strictures on areas such as the labor market regulations for smaller businesses to enable them to hire more people while continuing to protect the rights of working people. A new redesigned loan scheme is being introduced to enable small businesses to bounce back from the pandemic and the civic unrest that we went through. This new bounce back scheme incorporates lessons from the previous loan guarantee scheme, which did not work as well as I had anticipated when we launched it, if you recall, under the stimulus program that we launched, which was quite unprecedented in the history of our country. This new and redesigned loan scheme, which will serve small businesses, will involve in development finance institutions and non-bank SME providers in offering finance, expand the types of financing available, and adjust eligibility criteria to encourage greater uptake. The National Treasury is working with industry stakeholders to finalize the scheme, and the Minister of Finance will provide details soon. We are reviewing the Business Act alongside a broader review of legislation that affects small and medium enterprises to reduce the regulatory burden on informal businesses. We've found that there are too many regulations in our economy and our country that are unduly complicated, costly, and difficult to comply with. Now, this prevents companies from growing and creating jobs. I will forever remember the imagery of a woman who was selling these dog beds, which she had sewn up herself. She was on the side of the road selling, and the Metro Police accosted her and went on to try and arrest her. And in fact, arrested her, put her in the back of a van, police van. And her crime was, they said, she did not have a permit to sell a product which was going to put food on the table for her children. Now that, for me, is the regulatory strictures that we have introduced in our economy gone completely wild. Because what we need to be doing is to support that lady to sell products and support her family. Now we are therefore working to improve the business environment for companies of all sizes through a dedicated capacity in the presidency to reduce red tape. If we are to make progress in cutting unnecessary bureaucratic delays for businesses, we need dedicated capacity with the means to make changes. I've therefore appointed Mr. Sipho Nkosi to head up a team in my office to cut red tape across our economy and also our government. Now, Mr. Nkosi has extensive experience in business, including the fact that he was CEO of a mining company and is currently the chairperson of the Small Business Institute. Knows very well what red tape does to business and will be working alongside our officials to cut the red tape to enable our businesses to thrive and to grow. The red tape team will identify priority reforms for the year ahead, including mechanisms to ensure government departments pay suppliers within the required 30 days. The team will also work with other departments and agencies to unblock specific obstacles to investment and business growth. It will support the current initiatives to simplify processes relating to property registration, cross-border trade, construction permits, and all that. Infrastructure is central to our economic reconstruction and recovery. Through innovative funding and improved technical capabilities, we have prioritized infrastructure projects to support economic growth and better livelihoods, especially in energy, roads, and water management. The Infrastructure Fund is at the center of this effort, with 100 billion rand allocation from the fiscus. The Infrastructure Fund is now working with state entities to prepare pipeline projects with an investment value of approximately 96 billion in student accommodation, social housing, telecommunications, water and sanitation, and transport. Several catalytic projects to the value of 21 billion are expected to start construction this year. Of this, 2.6 billion is contributed by government, and the balance is financed by the private sector and development funding institutions. Government will make an initial investment of 1.8 billion in bulk infrastructure, which will unlock 7 private sector projects to the value of 133 billion. For millions of South Africans in rural areas, roads and bridges provide access to markets, to employment opportunities, to families and social services. Yet many children still have to brave overflowing rivers to reach schools, and motorists have to battle impassable roads to reach the next town. One person was telling me that they now have to drive on the side of the road because many roads are so bad. We are therefore upscaling the Welisizwe Rural Bridges Program to deliver 95 bridges a year from the current 14. Our South African National Defence Force is the implementing agent of the Welisizwe program and has demonstrated the expertise of the SANDF engineers in bridge construction. Earlier this week, I was in Tahalane village in Limpopo to launch a new road that is going to make a huge difference in the lives of neighboring communities. This road was constructed using block paving and other materials, which is a method that enables us to build durable roads faster and more cost effectively. I would like to see a situation where many of the roads that we have in our country, particularly in our township areas, in our rural areas, and in outlying areas, being paved, because paving is so much cheaper than using asphalt. The Rural Roads Program will use labor-intensive methods to construct or upgrade nearly 700 kilometers of rural road over the next few years. This social enterprise program includes access to roads in Limpopo, in the Eastern Cape, and to move from gravel to surface upgrades in the Free State, in Northwest, and capacity connectivity improvements in the Western Cape. Government has initiated the process of delivering the Umzimvubu water project. The project is made of a number of dams. The Ntabelanga Dam, the Lalini Dam, an irrigation infrastructure and hydroelectric plant, Ntabelanga water treatment works and bulk distribution infrastructure to reticulate to the neighboring communities. Now, the closing date for the first of the 2-stage procurement process is scheduled to close later this year, with a preferred bidder likely to be announced later this year as well. Government is introducing an innovative social infrastructure delivery mechanism to address issues that afflict the delivery of school infrastructure. The mechanism will address the speed, the financing and funding, quality of delivery, mass employment and maintenance. We still need to build some 2,500 or so schools in our country, and using current budgetary methods or processes, it'll probably take us 75 years to close that gap. However, with the new innovative mechanisms for delivery and financing, we should be able to do it much sooner. The delivery mechanism will introduce a special purpose vehicle working with prominent DFIs and the private sector to deliver school education infrastructure, with government obviously continuing to finance the building of schools. This approach is being piloted in schools in the Northern Cape and in the Eastern Cape, and will soon move also to other provinces, Limpopo and many other provinces. Now, over the past year, government has built on its successful Hydrogen SA strategy to make major strides in positioning South Africa as a global leader in this new market. And this is so because the endowments that we have as a country and as a nation for hydrogen capability are quite high. This includes the development of a hydrogen society roadmap for the next 10 years, as well as a green hydrogen strategy for the Northern Cape, supporting the development of green hydrogen pipeline worth around 270 billion rand. Now, the damage caused by the theft of scrap metal and cable on our infrastructure, like electricity, the trains and other vital services, is enormous. We will take decisive steps this year, both through improved law enforcement and by considering further measures to address the sale or export of such scrap metal. An important pillar of our economic reconstruction and recovery plan is to revitalize our manufacturing base and to create globally competitive export industries. In the past year, we launched new master plans in the steel industry, in the furniture industry, and global business services. Now, through these plans, which build on the other master plans that are already in operation and that are already yielding quite a lot of investment as well as job creation. Through these plans, business, government, and labor are working together to increase production and to create more jobs in the sectors. In the clothing industry, a number of retailers have announced ambitious plans with regard to localization sourcing. One of these retailers is Foschini, partly owned by workers, kindly made the suit that I'm wearing today at its new formal wear factory in Prestige here in the Western Cape in Epping. 5 years ago, more than 80% of all Foschini Group merchandise came from East Asia. Today, nearly half of their merchandise is locally made, which shows a great deal of progress. The genuine leather shoes that I'm wearing today were made by members, were made by members of the National Union of Leather and Allied Workers from Bolton Footwear in Cape Town and Dick Whittington Shoes in Pietermaritzburg in KZN. Now, the reason The reason one says this is to say, let us all promote localization. Let us buy locally made clothes and products, because it does not only create jobs for our people here in South Africa. Local is lekker, and let us do that. If you look at countries such as China, what has catapulted or continue to catapult them to a higher level is that they, as Chinese, consume what is locally made. We can also move up that scale and see more growth in our economy as we buy more local products and everything else. Nearly 4 years ago, we set ourselves a target of mobilizing 1.2 trillion rand in new investment over 5 years. By the time of the third South African Investment Conference in November 2020, we had reached 776 billion rand in investment commitments. Next month, on the 24th of March, we will be holding the fourth South African Investment Conference in Johannesburg. We will seek to showcase the many investment opportunities available as South Africa continues its recovery from COVID-19, and we will also report back on the progress of previous commitments. Following the resolution of the African Union Summit over the past weekend, trading can now begin under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The market on the African continent is now wide open. South African companies are poised to play a key role in taking up opportunities that this presents for preferential access to other African markets. And wherever we have gone on the African continent, either on state visits and holding business forums, we have found a great deal of demand for South African companies to come and invest, but also for South African products. So the market is wide open for South African companies to trade with other countries on our continent. The Free Trade Area Agreement is about Africa taking charge of its destiny and growing its economies much faster and exponentially. We will continue to pursue Africa's health sovereignty, working with other African countries and international partners to support the strengthening of the continent's capacity to respond not only to COVID-19 pandemic, but to other pandemics that may well come. We will increase our efforts to develop Africa's ability to manufacture vaccines. We have made significant progress here in South Africa with regard to the manufacturing of vaccines. We now have 2 African companies, Aspen and BioVac, in which the government has a stake, which contracts to produce COVID-19 vaccines. 2 additional vaccine projects have also been announced. In addition, we have full local production capability for ventilators, hand sanitizers, medical-grade face masks and gloves, and therapeutic drugs and anesthetics. This production capability, which is worth many billions of rands of production annually, has been put in place in less than 2 years. When COVID arrived on our shores, we did not really have the full capability of manufacturing all these medical supplies that are diagnostic and therapeutics. We now have, which goes to demonstrate the resilience of South African businesses to rise up to the occasion. And when we set up at the continental level the African Medical Supplies Platform, many of our companies were able to start trading on that platform, exporting medical supplies to various countries on our continent, also internationally, and particularly to the other region of our continent, which is the Caribbean. South African products have been exported to various countries, securing them vital supplies and expanding jobs for many young South Africans. While we will help existing industries to grow, we are also turning new opportunities for growth and jobs. Government and the private sector have worked closely together to grow the global business services sector from a small group of companies to one of the world's leading players. And I should say here, South Africa has become an attractive market for global business services. Our young people are being employed in large numbers. The global business service sector is on track to create 500,000 new jobs over the next few years. And these are young people who are being attracted to these opportunities. The hemp and cannabis, I go back to its sector, which is a new sector we are promoting, has the potential to create more than 130,000 new jobs. We are streamlining the regulatory process so that hemp and cannabis can thrive like it is in other countries. And as I said earlier, it is going to benefit a number of our people, particularly in those areas where this is grown in a big way as a great commodity. Now, as we proceed, we are finding that these new sectors, the sectors that should be promoted, are sectors that we should focus attention on because they create more jobs on an ongoing basis. The sectors that we are focusing on are sectors that a number of other countries have already shown a great deal of growth in already. Now, with all this, we are finding that we can inject growth into our economy. We can see exponential growth as more and more of these new sectors come forward. Now, other sectors are the social sector, for instance, including early childhood development, nursing, social work, and community services, which have shown significant potential not only to create jobs, but to provide vital services to communities, as well as to provide training for young people. Some of the country's mature industries also have a lot to offer in revamping the industrial and manufacturing potential of our country. The agricultural sector has significant potential for job creation in crops such as citrus, table and dried grapes, subtropical fruit, avocados, berries, and nuts. Master plans in the sugar and poultry industry are contributing significantly to increased investment, improved production and transformation. To attract investors into the mining minerals needed in the new global economy, we will soon be finalizing our mining exploration strategy. We will continue to support the development of upstream gas industry as it holds huge potential for job creation and broader economic development. We will ensure that this is done in strict accordance with the environmental as well as other laws of our country, and that where there are differences, we work together to resolve those differences in the interests of our country and the interests of our people, particularly with regard to creating jobs. We live in one of the regions of the world that is most affected by climate change. We frequently experience droughts, floods, and other extreme weather events associated with global warming. Recently, floods have affected a number of provinces in our country, including KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and the Eastern Cape. These have already caused enormous damage to infrastructure, but also to livelihoods. In the last year, we have made important strides in the fight against climate change and at the same time securing our economic competitiveness. For the first time, our climate targets are compatible with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is the goal that all countries agreed to as part of the Paris Climate Agreement, and is essential to prevent the worst effects of climate change. Now, since I established the Presidential Climate Change Commission, working with Deputy Chairperson to the Commission, Vale Musa, a little more than a year ago, it has done much work to support a just transition to a sustainable, inclusive, resilient, and low-carbon economy. At the International Climate Conference in Glasgow last November, South Africa was able to arrive at a historic 131 billion rand deal with a number of partners. This first-of-its-kind partnership will involve repurposing and repowering some of the coal plants that are reaching the end of their lives and creating new livelihoods for workers and communities most affected and impacted by this change. To ensure that South Africa is able to derive the full benefit of this and other partnerships, I have appointed Mr. Daniel Minele, a former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, as head of the Presidential Climate Finance Task Team to lead the mobilization of funds for our just transition. Now, properly managed, the energy transition will benefit all. Renewable energy production will make electricity cheaper and more dependable and will allow our industries to remain globally competitive as well. And in this regard, a number of our fairly sizable companies are already leading the way. And it's important that as government, we walk in tow with the innovations, the technological advances that they have already embraced. Investments in electric vehicles and hydrogen will equip South Africa to meet the global clean energy future. We will be able to expand our mining industry in strategic minerals that are crucial for clean energy, like platinum, vanadium, cobalt, copper, manganese, and lithium. We also have a unique opportunity in green hydrogen, given our world-class solar and wind resources and local technology and expertise. And all these measures, from the structural reforms to support our small, medium enterprises and investments in infrastructure and energy and emergency of new sectors, will drive a turnaround to economic growth driven, yes, by the private sector growth over the coming years. We know, however, that even with the best business environment and much faster rates of economic growth, it will take time for the private sector to create enough jobs for the millions of South Africans who need those jobs. Our intention is to make sure that as a nation we leave no one behind. That is why we are expanding public and social employment. The first two phases of the Presidential Employment Stimulus Programs, which we launched in October of 2020, have supported over 850,000 opportunities. More than 80% of the participants in these opportunities were young people, and over 60% of the participants were women. Now, that is an important development. And we were able to do this within a short space of time. Once we were hit by COVID, we gathered our wits around and decided that we needed to give protection to our people and to expand employment opportunities. This program has also supported young women like Tracy Nkosi from Springs, who was employed as an education assistant in Welgedag Primary School, and who says this opportunity has motivated her to further her studies in the educational sphere. She was brought in when we brought in assistants into our schools at the height of COVID, and we brought hundreds of thousands of them, and Tracy is one of those. And once arriving at the school to do what she thought would be menial work, she immediately found that she could do more important work, and now she wants to advance her studies and become an educator. It has also supported Umama Unosipho Tekwana from Mpendle in KwaZulu-Natal, who used her farming input voucher, which was part of this program, to buy maize, to buy manure, and supplements for her livestock. The total number of direct beneficiaries will soon rise to over 1 million South Africans with regards to the plan that we now have. This includes over 500,000 young people appointed as education assistants, making it the largest youth employment program ever undertaken in our history. The employment stimulus will also enable the Department of Home Affairs to recruit 10,000 unemployed young people for the digitization of paper records in the department, enhancing their skills and contributing. They will also be contributing to the modernization of citizen services. Now, these are young people that currently are unemployed that we will bring in. We would like to bring in more, but our fiscal position does not enable us to do so. The Social Employment Fund will create a further 50,000 work opportunities using the capability of organizations beyond government in areas such as urban agriculture, early childhood development, public art, and tackling gender-based violence. In addition to expanding public employment, we are providing support to young people to prepare them for the work and link them to opportunities in industries. To encourage hiring by smaller businesses, we will be increasing the value and expanding the criteria for participation in the Employment Tax Initiative. Now, this tax initiative has proven to be one of the most successful programs that we have put in place to bring in young people into the world of work. And invariably, the majority of them always find permanent employment once they are brought in through this program. We want to expand this so that more young people are brought into the world of work. For several years, this has been an effective way to encourage companies to hire new work seekers. The changes to the incentive will make it easier for small businesses in particular to hire young people. The Minister of Finance will announce the details of these changes in the budget. We call on companies to support this effort, to take up the incentive and give young people a place in the world of work. The SA Youth.mobi platform for young work seekers to access opportunities and support has now risen to 2.3 million young South Africans who have registered. And of these, over 600,000 have been placed in employment opportunities. A revitalized National Youth Service will recruit its first cohort of 50,000 young people during this next year, creating opportunities for young people to contribute to their communities, to develop skills, and to grow their own employability. The Department of Higher Education and Training will place 10,000 unemployed TVET graduates in workplaces from April of 2020. Now that is a big number, but we obviously would want more. In preparing this State of the Nation address, I was assisted by 2 young South Africans who are working as interns in the presidency, Ms. Naledi Malachi and Kiarabetswe Mabate. Now they told me about the pain that is felt by young people who find themselves with a qualification but are unemployed because of lack of experience. This forces many into jobs that have little or nothing to do with what they have studied. Now, all the measures I've outlined are essential to provide young people with the work experience that they need to take up their first step in the labor market. Now, we call on the private sector to support these measures and wherever possible to drop the requirement of experience so that we can give many young people a possible chance for their first job. Now, as we work to grow the economy and create jobs, we will expand support to poor families to ensure that no person in this country has to endure the pain and indignity of hunger. Our social protection system is amongst the greatest achievements of the democratic government, reaching more than 18 million people every month. Without this support, millions more would live in dire poverty. Since the onset of COVID-19, the Social Relief of Distress Grant has provided support to more than 10 million unemployed people who were most vulnerable to the impact of the pandemic. Some people use the money to start businesses. Mr. Tando Makubu from Soweto received 350 grant for 7 months last year and saved it to open an ice cream store that now employs 4 people. Now, Mr. Lindogu Shemsomi, an unemployed TV producer from Kwamashu Hostel, saved the 350 that he received for 9 months to start a fast food stall and to support his family. And as much as it has had a substantial impact, we must recognize that we face extreme fiscal constraints. A fiscal crisis would hurt the poor most of all through the deterioration of the basic services on which they rely. Mindful of the proven benefits of the grant, we will extend the 350 SRD grant for 1 further year to the end of March 2023. And we have been in deep consultations with a number of community-based organizations who have articulated very clearly to us the dire needs in our communities, but have also appreciated the challenged fiscal position that we are facing. And this is something that I am sure they will be able to appreciate. But we have also said we will continue conversations. We will continue conversations with them going forward. During this time, we will engage in broad consultations and detailed technical work to identify the best options to replace this grant. Any further support must pass the test of our own affordability and must not come at the expense of basic services or at the risk of unsustainable spending. It remains our ambition to establish a minimum level of support for those in greatest need. Expanding access to land is vital for our efforts to reduce hunger and to provide people with meaningful livelihoods. We are moving ahead with land reform in terms of our constitution and anticipate the approval of the expropriation bill during this year. The establishment of the Agriculture and Land Reform Development Agency will be finalized this year. The Department of Public Works and Infrastructure will finalize the transfer of 14,000 hectares of state land to the Housing Development Agency. We have enough arable land to support millions of thriving small-scale farmers in poultry, livestock, fruit and vegetables. Now, through the Presidential Employment Stimulus and the Solidarity Fund, over 100,000 small-scale farmers have already received input vouchers to expand their production. This scheme has proven to be effective and impactful, and it has established a very good delivery mechanism that ensures that we are able to reach so many of the small-scale farmers. The agriculture sector has also recognized the importance of supporting these small-scale farmers and integration into their value chains. Now, through the Sugar Master Plan, the sugar industry has provided 225 million rand to over 12,000 small-scale farmers who are in the sugarcane industry as part of a 1 billion rand commitment to support black farmers. We will be expanding the provision of input vouchers and calling on all sectors to join this effort. I would like to see a situation where various sectors of agriculture, whether it is in the fruit sector, in the beef sector, in the sheep sector, and many other sectors, collectively helping in these sectors like the sugar cane industry has done. But on our part, we will collectively reach out to 250,000 small-scale farmers this year, expanding beyond the 100,000 that we reached last year. None of our efforts to revive our economy will succeed if we do not tackle the scourge of corruption once and for all. Since the beginning of the year, I've been provided with the first two parts of the report of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture headed by Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. While the definitive conclusion has yet to be delivered at the end of this month, the first two parts of the report make it plain that there was indeed state capture. This means that public institutions and state-owned enterprises were infiltrated by a criminal network intent on looting public money for private gain. The reports have detailed the devastating effects on these criminal activities on the SAA, Transnet, Denel, South African Revenue Service, and government communications. Now, state capture had a direct and very concrete negative impact on the lives of all South Africans, but especially the poorest and most vulnerable members of our society. It has weakened the ability of the state to deliver services and to meet the expectations and constitutional rights of our people. We must now do everything in our power to ensure that it never happens again. My responsibility is to ensure that the Commission report is properly and carefully considered and then acted upon. Now, by no later than June, I will present the plan of action in response to the Commission's recommendations. And I'll present it to you sitting right here. We will, as the Commission's first report recommends, strengthen the system to protect whistleblowers who are a vital safeguard in the fight against corruption and who take huge personal risk in reporting wrongdoing. We are doing a detailed review of all applicable legislation and a comparative study of other jurisdictions to strengthen whistleblower protection. The relevant law enforcement agencies are taking the necessary steps to address the immediate concern about the safety of whistleblowers. Now, many individuals and companies that the Commission has found were responsible for state capture must now be held accountable. I have every confidence that the National Prosecuting Authority will carry out the further investigations that the Commission has recommended, and that it will bring the members of the criminal network that infiltrated government and captured the state swiftly to justice. Now, the investigating directorate in the NPA is now poised to deliver on its crucial mandate, and a dedicated team has been established to pursue these cases. We will be appointing a new head of the investigating directorate following the departure of its head from that position. An amendment to the State Capture Commission regulations in June in 2020 empowered the sharing of information between the Commission and the law enforcement agencies. This amendment also permitted the employment of the State Capture Commission personnel by law enforcement agencies. Now, these empowering provisions have geared the investigating directorate to more effectively pursue the investigations emanating from the Commission. We have gratefully acknowledged the offer of support from the private sector to assist in providing those skills which we lack in government to enable investigation and prosecution of crime. To ensure that the prosecuting authority remains true to its constitutional obligation and mandate, and to ensure transparency, we are developing a framework for private sector cooperation that will be managed through the National Treasury. There are also discussions underway with the judiciary for the creation of special court roles for state capture and corruption cases. While we have taken decisive steps to end the era of state capture, we know that the fight against corruption is far from over. Even as the country was suffering from the devastation of COVID-19 pandemic, companies and individuals were conspiring with public officials to defraud government of billions of rands in COVID-19 related contracts. As soon as evidence emerged of this corruption, we acted. We withdrew certain emergency procurement regulations, set up a fusion center that brought together law enforcement agencies. We published the details of COVID-related contracts online and instituted the most extensive investigation that the Special Investigating Unit has ever undertaken since its formation. In December, the SIU submitted its final report on its investigation into COVID-related contracts. As a result, 45 matters with a combined value of 2.1 billion have been enrolled with the special tribunal. The SIU has referred 224 government officials for disciplinary action and has referred 386 cases for possible prosecution by the NPA. Now, we have set up, as the presidency, a monitoring mechanism of implementation on the recommendations of the SIU and to ensure that government departments and entities do act against those who have violated regulations and broken the law. The fight against corruption will take on a new intensity thanks to the outcome of the State Capture Commission, the strengthening of law enforcement agencies, and the implementation of new anti-corruption practices in the public service. State-owned enterprises play a vital role in our economy, from water and roads to energy and ports to defense and aviation. These strategic assets of our nation are necessary to keep our country running. It is essential that we reverse their decline and reposition them to contribute positively. We have therefore embarked on several immediate measures to restore these companies to health at the same time as we undertake far-reaching reforms that will make our SOEs more efficient, competitive, accountable, and sustainable. The Presidential SOE Council, which I appointed in 2020, has recommended that government adopt a centralized shareholding model for its key commercial state-owned companies. This would separate the state's ownership functions from its policy-making and regulatory functions, and to minimize the scope for political interference, introduce greater professionalism, and manage state assets in a way that protects shareholder value. Now, as part of this, preparatory work has begun for the establishment of a state-owned holding company to house strategic SOEs and to exercise coordinated shareholder oversight. To ensure that state-owned enterprises are effectively fulfilling their responsibility, the Council is preparing recommendations on state-owned enterprises to be retained, on which should be retained and which should be consolidated, and which do not serve the purpose of the public should be disposed of. Any recommendations would be subjected to extensive consultation with all stakeholders. We are taking steps to safeguard our democracy, to protect our economic infrastructure, and to build safer communities for all. Earlier this week, we released a report on the expert panel that I appointed into the civil unrest in July last year. The report paints a deeply disturbing picture of the capabilities of our security services and the structures that exist to coordinate their work. The report concludes that government's initial handling of the July 2021 events was inept, Police operational planning was poor. There was poor coordination between the state security and intelligence services, and police are not always embedded in the communities that they serve. Now, the expert panel said that if violence has exposed anything, it was the poverty and inequality that is the root cause of the desperation of our people. The panel found that Cabinet must take overall responsibility for the events of July 2021. Now, this is a responsibility that we acknowledge and we also accept. We will, as recommended by the panel, develop and drive a national response to address the weaknesses that the panel identified. We will begin immediately by filling critical vacancies and addressing positions affected by suspensions in the State Security Agency and in crime intelligence. We will soon be announcing leadership changes in a number of security agencies to strengthen our security structures. Now, the staffing of the Public Order Policing Unit of the South African Police Service will be brought to an appropriate level with appropriate training in place as well. The ongoing damage to and theft of economic infrastructure has damaged confidence and severely constrained economic growth, investment, and job creation. At the same time, we need to confront the criminal gangs that invade construction sites and other business places to extort money from companies. This will require a focused and coordinated response. Government is therefore going to move ahead, and we've established specialized multidisciplinary units to address economic sabotage, extortion at construction sites, and vandalization of infrastructure. We will make resources available. We are going to make resources available to recruit and train an additional 12,000 new police personnel to ensure that the South African Police Service increases its capacity. Another area of immediate attention will be the re-establishment of community policing forums to improve relations and coordination between local police and residents of the areas they serve. It is clear from the observation of the expert panel that we need to take a more inclusive approach to assessing the threats to our country's security and determining the necessary responses. I'm calling on all South Africans through their various formations to participate as we go ahead to develop this whole process of a strategy. I will be approaching Parliament's presiding officers to request that Parliament plays a key role in facilitating inclusive process of consultation. The security services have been tasked by the National Security Council to urgently develop implementation plans that address the range of recommendations that have been put forward. Now, these measures will go a long way to address the serious concerns about the breakdown of law and order in society. This year, we are intensifying the fight against gender-based violence and femicide through the implementation of a strategic plan and also taking other measures to promote the empowerment of women. Earlier this month, I signed into law the 3 pieces of legislation which you passed, which has strengthened the criminal justice system, that also promotes accountability across the state and also supporting survivors. Now, the implementation of this legislation will definitely go a long way to ensuring that cases are successfully prosecuted, that survivors of gender-based violence are protected, and that there are more effective deterrents in place. We have made significant progress in reducing the DNA backlog processing, reducing it from 210,000 exhibits to some 58,000 at present. However, the fight against gender-based violence will never be won unless, as a society, we mobilize all formations and all citizens behind a sustained program of social action. As the COVID-19 pandemic has starkly demonstrated, a nation's health is directly linked with economic progress and social development. We will continue with the work underway to ensure universal health coverage for everyone in South Africa, regardless of their ability to pay for medical services or not. While public hearings on the NHI bill are continuing in Parliament, much progress is being made in preparing for the introduction of the NHI. More than 59 million people are registered on the health patient registration system. By September 2021, more than 56,000 additional health workers had been recruited and more than 46,000 community health workers integrated into the public health system. For the last 2 years, the education of our children and young people has been severely disrupted. As we return to normal educational activity, we will work harder to ensure that all learners and students get the quality education that they need and deserve. Government must work for the people. That is why our foremost priority is to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. We will soon be finalizing a framework for the professionalization of the public service. This will include tighter measures for recruitment of public servants, continuous professional development through the National School of Government, and partnerships between state bodies, professional associations, and universities. We will continue with various processes to ensure that we strengthen the public service. And in this regard, we will ensure that the public service who are going to be holding their important strategic conference later is able to address the challenges that our people face. This year, we will continue with the implementation of the district development model. This model brings all 3 spheres of government together with other social partners in every district to grow inclusive local economies and to improve the lives of our citizens. In particular, the DDM, as we call it, facilitates integrated planning and budgeting across spheres of government and improves integration of national projects at district and local level. While there are many parts of the state that require much work, there are institutions that continue to serve the people of this country effectively and efficiently. One such institution is the South African Revenue Service, which will be turning 25 years this year. While SARS was badly damaged by state capture, and it has made remarkable progress in restoring its integrity, its credibility, and its performance. Since its formation, SARS has collected some 16 trillion rand for the country's social and economic development. This revenue has enabled government to improve the lives of millions of South Africans through the provision of healthcare, education, social grants, and other basic services. A capable state is not only about the quality of public servants, but it is also about the efficiency of its institutions. It is also fundamentally about how citizens are empowered to participate. We must work together to ensure that platforms like school governing bodies, community policing forums are more active and more inclusive. A vibrant civil society operating at all levels, but more especially at local level and local government level, which we intend to strengthen, is crucial for a capable state and for development. We will therefore be working with our social partners to convene the long-awaited Social Sector Summit, and this summit will seek to improve the interface between the state and civil society and address the challenges that NGOs and community-based organizations face. Our country has suffered damaging blows in recent times. A confluence of forces, many of them from outside of our control, has brought us to where we are now. We face steep and daunting challenges. Indeed, we are engaged in a battle for the soul of this country, but there can be no doubt that we will succeed. We will emerge victorious in all these challenges that we face. We will never be defeated. And you know why? Because the spirit of resilience is deeply embedded in our DNA as South Africans. So I ask every South African to rally together, whether we agree with each other on certain issues or not, but there is a lot that binds us together. I ask all of us to rally together to fight against corruption, to also be involved collectively in our fight to create jobs, in our fight to achieve a more just and equal society. We have faced many crises in our past, and we have always overcome them. We have been confronted with difficult choices, and we have made those choices. In trying times, we have shown courage and resilience. Time and time again, we have pulled ourselves back from the brink of disaster and inspired hope, renewal, and progress. And we must do so again, now as we face these many challenges. I call upon all of us to forge this new consensus. And this consensus should not only be privy to government, business, labor, and communities. It should also be a consensus in which all of us join in. so that we can confront a new reality, a consensus that unites us behind our shared determination to reform our economy and to rebuild our institution. If there ever was a time when we should work together, this is the time for us to work together. So let us go ahead and work together instead of some of us tearing this country apart. Instead of some of us tearing our democracy apart. This is the time for us to work together and let us together build our country. But more importantly for me, this is the time, with all the economic measures that we've announced, as well as the other social protection measures that we've put forward, this is the time to leave no one behind. We must all move together as one, as South Africans. I thank you.
Welcome back. I'm not saying that could have been an email, but nearly 2 hours. That was perhaps pushing it a little bit. Silver lining. We need to look for a silver lining. And the silver lining is that the president spoke about business creates jobs, not government. Government must get out the way. DA has been saying that for years. He spoke about cutting red tape. DA has been doing that for years. He spoke about relaxing the SME regulations. We've been talking about that for years. He spoke about breaking up Eskom. We've been talking about that for years. So great DA policies, but I doubt very much he'll be able to implement them. If he needs help, we're always there for advice. But that's the positive side. On the other hour and 50 minutes, not so much. Your take, Ashok?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is that he didn't actually announce any of the key reforms. So, yes, you're right, he mentioned a lot of DA policy, but when it came to putting dates to it, he said, in the coming years, not committing himself to, by this point in the future, this will happen. And some of these things actually have been announced in the past. For example, when releasing Spectrum and switching over to digital migration, he wants to be the first president to be known for giving everyone digital TV by the sounds of it. You know, I think there'd be far more pressing plans, but digital migration should have started in 2007. It kept being pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, and now he says it will be done by March 2022. So these are not real reforms, and I think Zach's the expert in this. I'm going to
Yes, I was going to jump in right there, because the announcement about broadcast digital migration being complete by the end of March 2022, apart from being about 7 years late, it was meant to be completed by 2015 as per international agreements. All this speaks to is that they're going to switch off the analog signal transmission. Right? There's still the other side of the equation, which is whether or not indigent and low-income households have all received either the set-top boxes to be able to convert digital, or will have received the promised vouchers to be able to purchase or at least subsidize the purchase of their own set-top boxes. So what I've been saying in the Portfolio Committee for Communications is that we may very well have the hard shutdown or the meeting of the hard deadline of the signal switch off, but that's going to be accompanied by what I've been terming signal shedding, where thousands of households will now lose all access to television signal because they haven't got the digital TVs or set-top boxes to be able to access the airwaves that are now being transmitted.
Sounds like day zero for television.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think we perhaps need to just leave the green economy aside for 1 minute, because we're not sure whether it's a cannabis economy or whether it's an energy one. So let's leave that aside. But when we're talking about power and energy and load shedding, I mean, I thought it was very ironic that during that particular part of the speech, Eskom sent out a warning saying the grid is under severe pressure. And an independent state-owned transmission company,
That's a contradiction in terms, because by mere fact of it being state-owned and therefore subject to the ANC's cadre deployments, to patronage, it's going to be anything but independence. It's going to fall victim to the exact same problems that we've seen in almost any other public agency or state-owned body.
Yeah. Richard, what I found so interesting, I mean, Ashore touched on it, this was a SONA, a very lengthy SONA, more platitudes, promises. Tammy and I were joking again about these comprehensive social compacts, whatever that's supposed to mean. But what I found very interesting, having served on the water portfolio in Parliament, was the announcement of a new water agency. So we've got multitudes of water boards that are failing. Matola unable to provide water in the Eastern Cape, Lepeli Northern Water and Limpopo failing, its CEO in and out of court. We've got a water department that's besieged by corruption, and numerous turnaround plans and investigations and strategies, billions of rands owed to municipalities by water boards, and instead of right-sizing the department, getting rid of corrupt cronies and nepotistic, incompetent cadres, we now have the creation of yet another agency, an umbrella body that will work, concomitant to the department. So again, we see this ANC style of governance where, you know, the hand of the state and everything. More of the same.
If anything, sorry to interrupt you there. I just want to remind our viewers that we will be crossing to the DA Federal Leader, John Steenhuisen. He's outside at the moment talking to some of the media. It's a reminder that he will be coming out now to speak to the media. We will grab him as soon as we can, and you will get reaction from the federal leader. Sorry, Zach, I interrupted you there.
No problem. I was going to say, just very briefly, if anything, it sounds like it's going to become the water version of Eskom, which means it's going to be indebted, crony-ridden, corrupt, but not delivering the actual commodity or the actual service that it's mandated to do so.
Absolutely. And more to that point, in Ramaphosa's SONA speech last year, he promised the announcement of an agrarian land reform agency that did not materialize. And tonight we hear that there's an announcement of an agrarian and land development agency. So they've adjusted the name, and that this agency is going to be releasing 14,000 hectares of land to the HDA, the Housing Development Agency. Now, I wrote to the Minister of Human Settlements about this 3 years ago, Richard, to ask how much land was sitting before Cabinet, and the PQ response said 14,000 hectares ready for release. That was 3 years ago, Richard. Tonight we hear they've gone through what they can possibly do. They've seen, we're sitting on 14,000, another empty promise. Time will tell.
Set your clock, and then 3 years from now you can refer to this again. Exactly. I felt that on state capture, there was just a repeat of what we already know, that state capture was terrible, it impacted on the poor, it's done all these awful, awful things, and somewhere down the line, probably June, I believe, there'll be a plan of action, which he will share with us. Why don't we just arrest, prosecute, and imprison people? Why do we have to discuss a plan of action? Implement it.
Because he's waiting for part 3 of the report. That's yet to be released.
Yeah,
most likely.
Yeah. But the thing is, it shouldn't require any new plan. The plan should be the implementation of the mandates of the criminal justice system. Yeah. It should be investigative bodies investigate by following evidence leads. It should be the NPA prosecuting on the basis of the cases handed over to them. The plan is the mandates in law for those bodies. Just do it.
Yeah. To have special courts to prosecute it is putting the cart before the horse, because you need to have a strengthening of the bodies, whether it be a type of the SIU or the Hawks and the NPA, before you get to the court side. So, let's get people investigated, arrested, and then in court.
Yeah, if you haven't laid a single charge, you can't get them to court. Yeah. But I mean, the president was, to get back to Zach's point, you've got to say what is who are all the people involved. Sitting at the helm of this, actually, to a certain extent, is the president. He was head of the ANC's deployment committee, who signed up all of these deployments under Jacob Zuma. And of course, it's amazing how throughout his entire speech, he mentioned things like criminal networks that infiltrated the state and SOEs, and so on. He never once made reference to the fact that at the helm of all of this was his political party. The July riots report also said that the ANC was one of the root causes, and divisions in the ANC was one of the root causes of the riots. He somehow just managed to wiggle his way around that, not actually address what is in the public domain. Cadre deployment caused the breakdown of SOEs and BE. And that was the ANC's policy. The division of the ANC caused the July riots. He's proposing solutions that have nothing to do with the root cause, which is his political party. And he spoke as though he's not the head of a party that just lost its national majority for the first time since the dawn of democracy. As I said, I expect a bit more humility out of someone who got a thumping in the election.
Yeah, and also from someone who came here this evening and spoke as if they were observers as to what happened, as opposed to participants.
I was going to say, I think the president's rhetoric is actually very deliberate in terms of distancing himself and his party from the phenomenon of state capture and corruption as though it happened outside of themselves. I recall specifically he used the term a network of criminals infiltrated the state and state-owned companies. Well, the thought that occurred to me humorously was that network of criminals could be the NC of ANC.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we spoke about this earlier, that it's been said for a long time that we know who the baddies are in the apples, in the barrel of apples, but we're not addressing that. At no point did he say, he spoke about some changes in the leadership structure. And South Africans are tired of seeing a shuffle. If someone is guilty or is not doing their job or is incapable of doing the job, you can't just give them another post. You need to get them out. So don't just shuffle. Fire and replace them with capable people.
That would undermine the entire Cadre deployment system, which says that the party decides. And as we learned from the minutes of the Cadre deployment committee that the DA exposed, that you send, if you're an ANC member, you send your CV to the Cadre Deployment Committee, say I'm available for deployment, and based on your political favor with individuals in that committee, like Lindiwe Sisulu, who's on that committee right now, you will get a favorable deployment.
And what we saw from those minutes was that the president himself had to apologize to the Cadre Deployment Committee for not having consulted with them in terms of some of his appointments. But mentioning the Honourable Minister Sisulu, we see that Cyril has, in many regards, actually lost control of his cabinet. So we saw from the July riot report that came out, it was 154 pages. I think there's very few South Africans who've read all 154 pages, but ultimately what it said was that there had been a breakdown in both the views of the various state security ministries, so the police minister, the military, state security. There'd been different views in terms of what was going on, and there'd been different proposed responses. Now, in a situation such as that, especially in a time of crisis, what you require is leadership. And again, so as the president of this nation was unable to exercise his leadership in saying, this is the direction in which we will go. We saw it again with the Honourable Sisulu's tomes to the media in her Hi Mzansi, It's Time to Talk pieces, where, she had created a huge storm in the country. She had upset and offended the judiciary deeply, and Cyril called her in. And then the night that the media statements went out as to what had happened in that conversation, there were differing accounts. Where is our president? Where is our leader? What this nation requires right now is a strong man. A strong man or a strong woman who can take the ship by the helm and sail it. And we see bold, decisive leadership. And all of these platitudes and these promises and these agencies and these plans, it comes down to Cyril's endemic inability to take responsibility and to exercise leadership.
Well, going back to the July report, the riot report, exactly what you're saying, Ashwell, that they said, it was down to people being poor and the inequality. Whereas the report actually said that the divisions within the ANC should be investigated as a threat to state security. Okay. The question posed by the experts panel was the response by the police and security effective, appropriate, and timeous? And the answer, and I quote here, was an unequivocal no. So you can't brush over that. You can't say, well, we'll have another look and we'll see what happened and we'll try and figure something out. This report is saying these institutions failed, and if you failed, you need to be replaced. You need to have someone at the head of it. I mean, talking of 12,000 new police personnel that was promised, I probably out of turn here, but I would imagine that's 11,000 generals and 1,000 constables, because that's how it works. I mean, we don't have boots on the ground. We have cadres in offices with rank on their shoulders. So, I don't know, you want to talk about health, anybody?
Well, he's committed to the NHI. He basically said that he's going to persevere with NHI, and he didn't, affordability or sensibility doesn't matter. And it seems that he was fine if his NHI proposal collapsed the entire health system. And this is the danger of having an out-of-touch billionaire as a president. And a lot of people say, well, he's a billionaire, he's not going to steal any money, but fair and well, he might not be stealing any money himself, but his party is. But more importantly, if the health system collapses as a result of his policies, he can just fly to Singapore like Robert Mugabe did, and many follow the lead of many.
To Russia?
Visit Mabuza to Russia and get the finest healthcare in the world, while a country of 50-odd million people do not have access to healthcare as a consequence of his policies. So the National Treasury last year already said it's unaffordable, it should fall away. The NHI grants that have been created, the healthcare revitalization grants and so on, every year before my committee, you see them getting cut, or they get their environments, they get moved to other departments, other functions, because they don't get spent. This is a state incapable of rolling out a health service and centrally managing one. It would be dangerous for them to continue down this path, but nonetheless, the president has said he's going to continue regardless. It's really, really... It's as though he's got to disconnect with reality on this particular issue.
Which he does. I'd just like to remind our viewers that our leader, John Steenhuisen, is out of the building at the moment. He is speaking to the media, and he will be joining us as soon as possible. So don't go away. Stay with us for that. Yes, how do you have a health system that you can't maintain now and then you want to expand it and say we're going to give it to everyone regardless of whether they can pay or not? It's pie in the sky stuff.
Absolutely. What I did find very interesting, Richard, was the announcement that came towards the end of the speech that the social relief of distress grant was going to be extended for a further year. Now, the concept of a basic income grant is a concept that I think has been a hot political topic. It's a topic of great debate across many political movements and within many political parties. And I think that it was potentially an olive branch to the many millions of South Africans who are disenfranchised. I mean, Tammy, as one of our youth leaders, will be able to speak about the gravity of the youth unemployment crisis and the incentives that Cyril has announced now in terms of youth employment. And I think that SRD grant is perhaps an olive branch to the disenfranchised youth who have really been left out and have got no opportunities. Maybe that's one of the positives that we can take away from this speech. I mean, despite our ballooning public wage bill and social relief bill, but I do think that is potentially a positive.
Okay. I've just been told by the producer that John Steenhuisen, our federal leader, has joined our crew outside of the City Hall, and he will give us his report back on the SONA speech by President Ramaphosa. Over to you, Karabo.
John, what are your reactions to the President's address tonight?
Yeah, well, I think it's a mixed bag. I think there were some really good things in there, particularly on the economy. It's straight out of the DA playbook. All the things the DA are doing, cutting red tape, making sure that you are creating a conducive environment for business. But the big concession tonight, for the first time ever, an ANC leader and president admitting that the state-led approach doesn't work and that you need to harness the private sector. That's what a drum we've been banging for many, many years in the DA, and I think that's a very positive shift. The big takeaway for me tonight was how much the president has pulled individuals from outside his party and outside his own organisation into his office in government. Why is he not telling his cabinet ministers to be doing this thing? Surely the Minister of Small Business should be cutting the red tape. Surely these other people these responsibilities should be given to the ministers. I think it's a very clear sign the President's got a dummy cabinet around him who are unable to implement the plans that he would like to see for South Africa. And that's really the problem that bedevils every SONA. Great plans, great announcements, as we move from SONA, implementation fails. You have ideological pushback from within ministries, etc. So I hope the President's going to be able to take his party along with what he's announced, not because it's certainly a radical departure from anything that they've done before. And I think, as I said, we will support anything that brings growth and development to South Africa and creates jobs. For me, the big omission tonight was how we're going to catch up those young students, learners at schools who've lost 50% of their learning. We've already seen that literacy and numeracy have declined dramatically over the course of the last year and a half, thanks to the madcap policy of rotational learning. And I think that there should have been a far more focus on how we're going to help them to catch up so we don't end up with a lost generation of South African learners who are faced with a lack of skills to be able to compete. Then the other thing I think is very important is, he spoke again about corruption tonight. And I'm afraid he can talk till he's blue in the face until the time that you see the first high-profile conviction in jail. That's when you know we're going to be serious. The NPA has not been able to. I think they've been moving very slowly. They're not doing the work as quickly as we would like, and it's causing exasperation and frustration. So I think that what we need to see is far more focus on how we're going to fight corruption. And again, the President's big test is going to come, because many of those people in the Zondo Commission report are sitting around his cabinet table. They're sitting around the headquarters at Luthuli House. How's he going to take action against them? And I think that we also then need to make sure we've got a fit-for-purpose corruption-busting agency that's designed specifically to detect and prosecute corruption in a multidisciplinary kind of way. So I think, like most SONAs, very good ideals, it's all going to come down to the implementation. And if you want some help with it, the DA is ready. We're already doing many of these things in the governments where we're running, and we're happy to assist in getting our economy back on track. But very, very glad that the ANC, well, certainly their president, has abandoned the state-led growth approach of the ANC, which has caused so much destruction.
Okay. Parting shots, what are your sentiments to millions of South Africans who are today left hopeless and have absolutely no faith in the ANC and government?
Well, the reality is that many of the good things that have been announced tonight are not going to be achieved, and people need to understand that. Last year we were promised a digital migration. We were promised that the Rural Development Agency was going to be up and running. It never materialized. We were told that at the end of last year, bid window 6 would be open. I think that if you're living in a shack in South Africa and you're looking for a way out for yourself and your family, the only help that's going to be on your way is when we get a new government in place with new ministers around the table that are able to change things. You're not going to win a war with the same generals sitting around the table losing the war. You're going to need a new set of people around. So the President talks about a new consensus. I agree with him, but the new consensus should be a new government that's sitting around making decisions, because that's how we're going to get growth, that's how we're going to get people into work, and that's how we're going to build a society of opportunity.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Yes. Hey, Lester, how are you doing, man?
So, do you think the President spoke enough about corruption tonight?
Look, absolutely not. I mean, I think it's one thing to speak about something in as much as the President has mastered the skill of speaking about something, but not necessarily showing us exactly what it is that he's going to do. So it's not enough to simply say we'll put in measures to make sure that the State Capture Commission report is implemented and that it will be released and we will make sure. But ultimately what you've also got to make sure is that you capacitate the crime-fighting agencies, the criminal justice system. You've got to make sure that the NPA is strong and that it's got investigating capacity. You've got to make sure all of these things. So you've got to put where your money, where your mouth is. And ultimately, I mean, the President didn't once actually announce how we're going to make sure that corrupt politicians end up in jail. So frankly, I mean, he mentioned all of these things, but they simply don't matter unless there's real action. The mere fact that there's not a single person, not a single politician who's been arrested for COVID corruption or state capture is a massive indictment.
So promises is what the President is good at, right? But implementation is always a problem. Absolutely. How is the DA going to help the President or make sure that these promises are implemented?
Look, I mean, one of the big things that we've got to do, particularly in Parliament this year, is to make sure that Parliament regains its teeth, and we've got to make sure that we capacitate Parliament to make sure that actually it does its work, because the Constitution really empowers the Parliament to do its work. In fact, I'm of the belief that half of what has happened under state capture wouldn't have happened had Parliament been functioning properly. And so we've got to get back to the business of the people. We've got to make sure that Parliament is incapacitated. We've got to make sure that parliamentarians know what their role is, and we've got to make sure that the rules are amended to show greater accountability and greater oversight on the executive. That's the only way we're going to start making sure that people end up accountable for what they're doing.
Thank you very much, sir. Back to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Karabo. Yes, back to the studio after listening to John and Saviwe give us their thoughts. Very interesting. I'm certainly looking forward to the response and the debate coming up. I think it's going to be very interesting. Tammy, I'm coming to you because you were champing at the bit to say something just before we cross to the federal leader. What is on your mind?
I wanted to say that, it's one of those silver linings that I guess I picked up during the speech. One thing I would like to welcome is the president's announcement to get government to start a new initiative that would basically incentivize companies to hire more youth. One thing I do want to mention, though, is that back in 2012, if I'm correct, the DA introduced this new policy called the Youth Wage Subsidy, which the government at the time rejected. So it is quite welcoming to see President Cyril Ramaphosa 20 years later regurgitate that same policy. So I think that is one positive aspect from the speech. But I also wanted to say, when he spoke about assisting young people to enter the world of work, he didn't actually give any detail or practical steps on how he's going to achieve that. So I do think that is something that I personally will be keeping an eye out for. And then also one thing I would have liked the president to address more is the NSFAS crisis, which I don't think enough people are speaking about at this moment. We just passed the month January, and there were thousands of first-time students who applied to university who have just been denied access to university funding. That is something I would have also liked President Cyril Ramaphosa to touch on, but alas, hopefully we can address that at some other point. I think there was one positive announcement that came out of the youth development space, and that was the DA's 2012 policy.
Ultimately, yeah.
If you think we're talking for nearly 2 hours and you didn't even get to address all the crises, then you know we've got plenty of them. Ashu, a final thought from you.
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing the chapter closing on the ANC chapter in South Africa closing, because this is a president who spoke about reforms, didn't commit to any timeframes, didn't commit to any deadlines, didn't commit to achieving it. If you're not prepared to commit to those things, it means that you're uncertain about your future. And I think tacitly they're admitting that these are the last days of ANC government. And when that chapter closes, it might be as soon as 2024, who knows? They've lost their national majority last year. I don't think it's going to be reopened again. I think South Africans are going to move on. And the general sense I got from listening to the lethargy of the president is that even in the back of his mind, he's probably conceding that these are the last days of ANC government.
Yeah. Party before country is not working, and it's not good. The people have seen through it, and country has to be put before party, otherwise party must go. Zach, last word from you.
Look, Richard, just to weave together the last couple of strands, as John said, Ramaphosa has abandoned his cabinet. He's bringing outside people, non-ANC people, to drive certain spearhead thrusts. And as you said at the start of this section, and as Tammy said, is that essentially he's announcing and adopting DA proposals. And what these two things in tandem tell me is that the president and the ANC have lost legitimacy, they've lost momentum, they've lost the initiative, and they're out of ideas and will soon be out of power. End of story.
Tammy, last word?
I think the proof will be the pudding, and only time will tell. For now, it was just empty words from the president, repeating things that he said in previous SONAs. Time will only tell if he is actually serious about addressing some of South Africa's most pressing challenges.
Rinse and repeat, doomed to fail.
Exactly.
Emma, last word goes to you.
Well, Richard, to conclude, I think that my colleagues have summed it up quite well. South Africa doesn't need more promises and platitudes and more social compacts and agencies. What we really need is action. And I think that was 2 hours of time, 2 hours of our lives, probably won't get back, but time will tell, and will give the president the benefit of the doubt on the youth development goals and on the social relief of distress grant. Other than that, we're going to be watching very closely.
Big thank you to the SONA squad, but an even bigger thank you to the viewers who've stayed with us throughout the programming. I hope you have enjoyed our insights, and I hope that you found our guests as insightful and at times entertaining as I did. Of course, SONA marks the start of the parliamentary year, and we will continue to deliver all the inside scoops to our viewers, you the viewer, as the year continues. South Africa is at a crossroads with serious issues all around us. However, the DA is working to solve these issues where we govern and protect residents who live in DA towns and municipalities from the failing national government. Remember, keep an eye out on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Like and share our content with your friends and family. From myself and my studio guests, we wish you a great evening. Stay safe. Take care.